Oh, there we go. Good evening. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, February 7th, 2018 edition of our little weather get together. And tonight we're going to be reviewing the Southeast Climate Report. We have Jordan McLeod on with us from the Southeast Regional Climate Center. I'll get it right eventually. I have it wrote down right here, and I can't read tonight. So Jordan will be joining us tonight. He's going to be kind of going over the climate report. As we know, it's kind of an active season throughout the Southeast, and we're going to dive into that report tonight and kind of talk about what it meant for our area and maybe what it's going to mean for our area coming up this year. So we're happy to have Jordan. First time guest, so we'll have him introduce himself here in just a little bit. But before we do that, since we are a live broadcast, we have a few housekeeping things. If you're watching tonight on our Facebook Live, Periscope, our YouTube page, please feel free to interact with us throughout the show. You can do that numerous ways by commenting either on the Periscope feed or the Facebook Live feed, or even on the YouTube page. It gives you an area to comment. And if not, you can interact with us on Twitter at Carolina WX Group. We'll be monitoring those throughout the night as well. And as we are finishing up the program, we'll let Jordan promote his social media accounts, not only for himself, but for the Climate Center as well. And if you have any questions, you can direct them that way as well. And I'll tell you, I use the climate website a lot. And I think after tonight's show, a lot of you guys who are watching tonight will really find some usefulness of what all you can do on the page. So looking forward to having Jordan on with us tonight, and not only talking about the climate report, but also all the things you can do on their website. So with that, it's been a semi-quiet week. We really turned the pattern here. We're not really cold anymore. It's more of a kind of a cool, damp pattern. And today, big rain maker for most of the area. I know here in western North Carolina, we got close to 1.5 inches of rain, and some areas even seeing some flooding in the Greenville, Spartanburg area, as well as the North Carolina mountains. So a lot of heavy rain today, and we're going to see more heavy rain over the weekend. But it wasn't really change of story down in the Charlotte area. I'll bring in James with this. James, you guys also saw a lot of heavy rain in the Charlotte area today.
Yeah, that's right, Scotty. I was actually just telling everyone before the show that I forgot to bring in my trash cans last night. Don't tell the HOA. And they were left out in the street with their lid open. And when I went to bring them in before, I didn't measure it. This isn't a scientific observation, but there were several inches of rain sloshing around there in the bottom of my trash can. So we did have a pretty eventful morning commute through the first half of the day, compounded by the fact that our GSP radar was down for maintenance. But luckily, we didn't have any severe weather of any sorts. And I'm hearing some late-breaking news, Scotty, that you're telling us that that GSP radar may be back up in use as early as tonight.
Yeah, that's correct. I did see a tweet sent out from them just about an hours a half ago, and it said the maintenance was completed and everything was ready to go. So that'll be real helpful as we go into Friday and Saturday and over the weekend with another chance of heavy rain and even some storms. And talking about storms and heavy rain, Shay, you and Jared as well in the Charleston area saw some heavy rain. I'll toss it to Jared first, and then I'll let Shay kind of talk about the effects of the rain as well in his area. But Jared, kind of a soggy day for you guys in the low country as well.
Yeah, we need it. It's kind of funny looking at the climate report. It all fell after 5 o'clock, so there's nothing in the climate report that says anything about rain. So you go to the observations, about 0.3 of an inch. Good little downpour came through. We had first thunder at the airport recorded by the observer at the airport since November 9th. So, woo, storms. We were just really excited to see that. Had a nice shelf cloud come through. And then, we're just on this little roller coaster right now. It seems like every weekend we get at least half of it is rained out, and looks like the upcoming weekend is gonna be the same. But we're trying to we're trying to beat back some drought, so I can deal with that.
Yes, very, very true. A lot of the area in the Southeast needing some rain. And Shay, I'll bring you in on this. I was talking a little bit earlier, hints of a pattern change, and I know you and I and Jordan and James was talking about this before the show. Really starts to seem that we're flipping that pattern into a more moist pattern and kind of a warmer pattern for us here in the Southeast over the next few weeks.
Well, let me take myself off of me. That's absolutely right, Scotty. One thing real quick, I want to back up and show the drought monitor for the Southeast, which if you can see everything here, we can see that the drought has been sort of creeping up slowly week by week. And so we have some areas that are starting to become severe, like D2 areas, D3 extreme drought over in Alabama. Some of these areas are abnormally dry into South Carolina and even spreading towards the coastline. But the good thing is that the radar signatures from today with the cold front, this cold front has sort of stalled along the coastline. So that's continuing some of the Gulf moisture across some of these areas that really need this rain pretty badly. So it's a good thing for this front and maybe some of the other fronts to come as well. When we talk about the future pattern, I'll run from Tropical Tidbits, one of my favorite little sites here to go to. And we sort of see a pattern where the mid-Atlantic states and to the north are going to get some of this colder air and some of the snowstorms as they normally would this time of the year. And when we start running the models, we don't want to get too far out in time, but we can see that the high pressure that moves out into the Atlantic really brings up a southerly draw, and you can see the moisture lifting up into the southeast region by Saturday, February the 10th. So we have more moisture on the way along where undulating fronts are to the north, and then we just get a lot of moisture. We had this Bermuda high sort of sitting out here and just keeping that southerly warm flow with moisture training up into the southeast. So I think we're going to see the drought pretty much diminish here over the next few weeks or so, as this pattern seems to want to continue over and over again. So we could be setting up for a rather warm, maybe a warmer than expected latter half of February. And we're just going to watch and see what happens, though. But it looks like we're right now for the southeast, we're looking pretty good. You know, we got moisture and warmth. The only thing we may need to look for in the future is some severe weather.
All right, thank you for that, Shay. And I'll bring in the one guy who did have a little brush with some winter weather. We'll bring in Eric. Eric, you guys had a little bit of everything yesterday. I think you had thunder, lightning, and maybe some snow flurries or sleet pellets in the Memphis area.
We were that close. We did have thunder and lightning, and we were 2 counties south of the winter weather advisory. The precipitation we got overnight, which brought inch and a half of rain from last evening into the overnight hours. So pretty good deluge here. But the precip moved out just as the temperatures were falling. We did hit 32 this morning, but it was after the rain had ended. So we skated by. Well, we didn't really skate by. We got through that event because we would have been skating if we'd been in northeast Arkansas last night. Some reports of about 1/4 of an inch of ice, freezing rain up there last night. So they were under an ice storm warning. But we made it through with just rain, which I'm happy about. The clouds stuck around today. We got to a balmy 36 this afternoon for the high. And we are in an area of the southeast that is not in a drought. And so we keep getting an event like this every 3 or 4 days, and we're going to stay that way, I think.
Very much so. And Eric, you brought a memory. James, I don't know why we didn't talk about this, but we even had a little bit of ice here in the Carolinas over the weekend. And
we did. That's right. It feels like a millennium ago, but
not much of an issue.
No, it was one of those early in the morning, little bit of icing, especially up in your neck of the woods in the foothills. Not so much here in South Charlotte, but then by the time we got to noon, it was raining and it was all gone. It does remind me of a tale that I think was 2017. I want to say about mid-March. We had snow in the morning, and then it was like 60 some odd, almost 70 degrees in the afternoon. And my sister happened to be visiting that day from upstate New York, and she was very confused. So it reminded me very much of that day.
That is, it was, I think some areas we got close to a 1/4 inch of ice, but by 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon, everything was warmed up and almost melted away. So I'm going to put on my Florida Gator hat tonight because I'm going to toss this to James Brierton, who is a graduate of the University of Georgia, who's going to be talking to Jordan McLeod, who is also a Georgia Bulldog, and I just couldn't really stand all that Georgia love going on in here. So,
I was
James,
I'm going to like you, Scotty.
My Gators and we're going to toss it to you guys, and we'll start tonight's conversation.
I meant to cover up my big bald head with my University of Georgia hat, and I will have to go get it, Jordan. But I think Jordan is wearing a Super G shirt tonight or sweater. What is that there, Jordan?
Yeah, I've got my black UGA polo on tonight.
Okay, so we are representing. That's right. So we had Dr. Marshall Shepard on a few weeks ago. You may recall there was a lot of Georgia love. So Jordan and I were in some of those classes together. So it's good to talk with you again, and thanks for coming on the show tonight. I'm going to start off our Q&A with a really simple question, but I know some of the panelists on our show are familiar with the work of the Southeast Regional Climate Center, but I'm not sure our audience may be fully aware of it. So first question tonight is, can you just tell us a little bit about what the Climate Center does?
Sure. So, my name is Jordan McLeod. I'm the regional climatologist at the Southeast Regional Climate Center. We're located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Go Heels! And we, let's see, I've been in this position for going on about 2.5 years now. So we're one of 6 regional climate centers across the country. Each one of them are responsible for probably about a 5 or 6 state region. And so our area of responsibility is Alabama, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Virginia, and also Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands down in the Caribbean. So pretty, diverse area in terms of different weather and climate extremes. I want to give a shout out to two of my colleagues. So the director of the center is Dr. Chip Conrad. He's been at the center for many years now, I think since 2007, if memory serves right. And William Schmitz is our service climatologist. And so he, answers the phone for media requests. He's in charge of our social media accounts, which I'll introduce a little bit later on. And also, helps me out tremendously with looking up climate data for the reports, like the one I'll be sharing shortly. So we, that's kind of an overview of what we do. We're sort of responsible for analyzing, any weather and climate data across the region. And what we really try to do is value add that data. Anybody can go on the internet now and look up, what were the temperatures over the past year, numbers like that. But what we try to do is really value add that and produce products or graphics or reports that sort of tell the story behind those numbers.
And you mentioned the report, and we're going to go through it here pretty extensively, and you're going to do a much better job of it than I can. So I'm happy we have you. But I was starting to look over it yesterday and got a little highlighter crazy at times because there were some areas that really popped out at me, not only as a great kind of walkthrough of what we experienced in 2017, the extremes, the highs and the lows, and the averages of everything in between, but there are really also some really key events that I think we've been talking about here in the Carolina Weather Group, such as Hurricane Irma and such, that really stand out. And I'm glad you mentioned your states that you guys cover as well too, because obviously we focus a lot on North Carolina and South Carolina, but you guys have some great data here on some of our neighboring states and also some of those islands you talked about as well too. So they're all kind of here in the report. And what an eventful 2017 it was for so much of that region. And I want to go through it in just a moment. But before we do that, just so we can, I think, kind of all grasp a little bit of what you guys do on a day in and day out basis. What's an average day for you like as a regional climatologist?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically, I go into the office and sort of, check through and see, what's happened over the previous day. If there were any notable weather events, such as we had the freezing rain event that you guys were talking about in parts of the Carolinas and really up into Virginia as well. My job is to kind of go through any of the National Weather Service products that are issued, like public information statements, we call P&S products. Any sort of summaries that have been put out by the Weather Service. We work in close collaboration with all of the different weather forecast offices across our region, really valuable partners. And so I go, with the help of William Schmitz, go through those products and try to really synthesize or summarize the information that's in there in kind of a regional perspective. We don't always get, we don't get down into the super nitty gritty details all the time, but we try to kind of keep things in a broader regional context. And really, I think a key word, and it's also the name of one of our key products that I'll show, is try to put weather and climate information into perspective, and really into historical perspective. So If we've noticed that there's been extreme snowfall totals that have been recorded, we try to go back in the database and see just how extreme those are and try to put that into context for people to understand.
And there's all sorts of really interesting data in here, not only from a weather and climate perspective, but also as folks are listening, I think maybe just shout out a few of these. But you talked about snowfall and the like, and going back to last year, Mount Mitchell, North Carolina, absorbed its highest one-day snowfall for December and its fourth highest one-day snowfall for any month on record, an accumulation of 25 inches. I mean, that's quite a lot of snow, and I know you're going to be walking us through some of this. But as I was highlighting last night, I couldn't help but think we're just going to have all these local shout-outs for folks who are listening and tuning in tonight as we make our way through this report. What do you guys use to I know you mentioned the National Weather Service and the public information statements, but are there certain tool sets that are out there that you guys use to monitor and observe these events? And I ask that with the notion in mind that today we had lots of rain come through the region, but we had no radar in Greenville, Spartanburg, no radar in Charleston, Jacksonville. I mean, how does that affect what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, that can be pretty substantially impactful at times, for what we're doing. I would say, one way to distinguish what we do at the Climate Center versus like a weather forecast office, for example, we're not we are degreed meteorologists, but we don't do forecasting for our jobs. And so that's a really key distinction to make I think for viewers, is that we're not a forecasting agency, although I'd say we're capable of doing that. But we really look at things in a retrospective manner. And so after a storm, has come through, for example, let's just say a severe weather outbreak, I'll sort of monitor storm surveys, for example. If there's been a tornado outbreak, I'll sort of monitor how many storm surveys are put out. These are conducted by the Weather Service. They go out and use the damage path of tornadoes to rate and also assess tornadoes and to determine if they occur, for example. I gather all of that information and compile it, to use in all of our reports. And, also if there's really noteworthy aspects of a given weather event, we really try to push that information out to all of our users, via social media. Social media has been a tremendous outlet for us as the Climate Center to really put out this information to a wide variety of users, so that they can, really start to understand how these weather events fit into a climate perspective.
So let me ask you a little bit about this report here. It's dozen or so pages in length, lots of data sets in it, and some graphics that you guys put together as well too. Can you just, I guess from a high level, to kick things off, how would you summarize what stood out to you in this 2017 report that you and your colleagues put together? I honestly, off the top of my head, I would say it was a year with a little bit of everything for the region. We, as I kind of reflected back through the report today, probably doing similar to what you were doing, kind of highlighting different sections that I thought were really important to bring out this evening. It's just amazing how many different, variety of weather extremes and impacts and different types of events were recorded. Anything from a big winter storm, actually a couple of big winter storms, one in January 2017 and then one this past December. We had record-breaking tornado activity across the region, particularly Georgia, and I'll try to remember to mention that later on. Obviously, the tropical cyclone season was a huge story, perhaps the biggest story for the Southeast. 7 landfalling tropical cyclones. Not all of those made landfall in our region, but they did go on to have indirect or even actually direct impacts in our region. And let's see what else. We had, exceptional warmth across the region, which just kind of seems to be a broken record at this point. So anyway, I would just say, a year with a little bit of everything. I don't want to rob you too much of the highlights you've made. I've made just one or two here. And you mentioned the warmth, and I know this conversation tends to get a little political, but that's not what we're looking to do here. We're just looking at the data sets. But, this sentence kind of jumped out to me. 2/3 of the long-term stations, the weather observation stations, observed or tied their warmest annual mean temperature on record, including Asheville and Columbia in the Carolinas. South Carolina observed its warmest year on record, while North Carolina tied their warmest. I mean, I'm only holding the 2017 report. I know you've been in this job for a little bit. That would be the trend, more or less, would it not?
Definitely. I mean, it seems like, at least in the few years that I've been doing this, it seems like every year we continue to set new record-breaking warm records, across the region. And, whether we're looking at this from a station-based perspective, so individual stations, like you mentioned, Augusta and Columbia, Asheville and others, we had, like you said, 23 of those across the region. And again, these are long-term stations, which in this report I defined as having at least 50 years of data. So, we're looking at stations that have a very good period of record, very good data efficacy. And so it's really impressive that we would have that many that are observing their warmest annual mean temperature on record. But then also, if we aggregate all of that station data, and NCEI, or the National Centers for Environmental Information, who's our source of funding within NOAA, they create what we refer to as state average data, and they produce that usually actually right about this time every month, kind of the end of the first week into the second week. And if we look at that data aggregated into, for each state, yeah, we're seeing, like this year, we saw, I think, 3 states that either tied or observed their warmest year on record. Previous years, it could have been different states, but we're seeing across the Southeast, this, like you said, this general upward trend in temperatures.
Being where we are in winter in February, I think many of us like a quick peek at snow, and then we're ready to move on to some other things, and we all get excited when the warm temperatures come on out. But it is winter after all, and so I was thinking about that last night, reading that Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am, spent 236 days, or 65% of the year, above 70 degrees as their maximum afternoon high. Raleigh, some 231 days. We get these warm spells here. And we're all really grateful that the weather is warm. But this eventually, after continuing for several days, will come up to the level of, I guess, being into the climate. I think what I'm trying to get at, not only is it a great sales pitch for the Carolinas to tell Northerners who are tired of winter that they can come on down here and spend 65% of the year or more in 60-degree plus temperatures. Mom, Dad, I'm looking at you. But I know recently the AMS, the American Meteorological Society, published a letter to a certain high government official who, I don't want to get into politics, but just to remind that individual of the difference between climate and weather. So before I have you, Jordan, go through the bullet points you guys have here, can you set that stage for us, the difference between climate and weather?
Sure. I mean, honestly, if I failed this question, I probably should have both of my degrees stripped from me. So, you can tell me how good I do, but no, kidding aside. Yeah, I mean, basically, weather is just short-term variations in atmospheric conditions at a given location, or it may be up to a regional scale. So we're talking about, parameters like atmospheric moisture. So think of that as like humidity at the surface, air temperature, wind speed, cloudiness, whether it's precipitating or not. All of those different conditions combined together produce what we think of as weather. Again, this varies on a relatively shorter time scale, so anywhere from minutes to hours to days to maybe a week or a couple of weeks at the most. It's a little bit, the boundary between weather and climate can be a little fuzzy at times. But, so that's kind of weather. And then climate is more of the longer term average of those weather conditions. And I want to be careful because, I learned a key distinction is it's not just the average of those weather conditions. climatologists typically look at a 30-year period as kind of the representative sample of weather conditions, if you will. But it's also, I think it's useful to think about climate in terms of a distribution. So hopefully we all kind of remember the bell curve or the normal distribution, back in statistics. And so that's, to me, I kind of think of that distribution when I think about climate as, the average is kind of the peak of the bell, if you will, so sort of the middle of that curve. But you also can't forget the two tails of that distribution, or that's what we think of as extremes. So it's kind of that combination of average weather conditions, which honestly are not really observed all that frequently, and sort of that tail portion of the distribution, or the extremes that are occasionally observed.
I have to apologize, Jordan, to one of my panelists who was trying to give me the wave signal to tell me he had a question, and so I'm going to make my way back down to Charleston, South Carolina, and Shay Gibson, I think, has a question for you. My apologies, Shay. The floor is all yours.
No, James, all good, all great points leading to the bulk of the topic that we're getting into tonight. I wanted to ask you real quick though, Jordan, when you're collecting all this data, I'm sure that you're getting information from the Weather Service offices across the Southeast region and wherever your respective regions are. Are there any other tools that you use, say like the CocoRoss network, or any other private network, private weather company, anyone else that you're getting data from that's considered official or unofficial, or how are you compiling everything to get your products?
It's a great question, Shay, and the short answer to that question is yes. We're absolutely focused a bit, exclusively there on the Weather Service. But you're right. I mean, we also definitely take into account the CocoRoss network. That's been tremendous in sort of filling in the gaps. I mean, we have, I would say, in the Southeast, we have a pretty dense network of sort of first order stations, if you will. So the ASOS network, the automated system, and also the cooperative observer network. But it's still not dense enough to capture, especially, for example, during the summertime when we have pop-up convective thunderstorms and we're trying to figure out what's the highest rainfall that we observed across a given area. The CocoRoss network really comes in handy there, where we can drill even finer down to what people are observing. And we use CocoRoss stations at the Climate Center in our reports frequently. Give you a shout out too. I know you're part of the WeatherFlow network, and I used several of the WeatherFlow station wind observations in the report for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. That came in tremendously handy for me, because there's relatively fewer stations, as you know, in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, at least first order stations. So that WeatherFlow network was great for us to be able to find, fill in the gaps there.
Yeah, NHC, we're partnered with them, so it's a great relationship that we have to be able to share the data with them and have them put into their reports. So I'm kind of guessing here that sort of continuing on, we looked at, to the viewers here, my apologies, the CocoRoss network has to do with precipitation, how much rainfall has fallen over an area. There are other tools though, like, and this is kind of where you talked about real time versus after the fact. Do you ever look at real-time radar for any kind of information on severe weather? Do you say you don't forecast, but do you observe in real time what you're doing?
Definitely. I mean, we definitely track weather systems. Whether it be a winter storm or perhaps a March March cyclone with severe weather, or even a landfalling tropical cyclone. We track those in real time, and really, I think it gives us an appreciation for how an event develops. And, by us sort of tracking that in real time, I think we're able to really sort of gather bits of information that, will really help us in whether it's reporting or whether we want to send out information via social media. I think by following it as it develops, that kind of helps us as meteorologists assess the storm in a deeper way, rather than if we just wait for the storm to finish and dissipate or move on. Then we're kind of retracing our steps, and we may forget things along the way. So we definitely use all of the the operational radar, satellite, the GOES 16 satellites have been tremendous here in just the short amount of time it's been operational. Obviously this all of the station observations, we track those in real time as well. So definitely a part of what we do.
Good deal. And last part for me is, do you consider what you do partially forensic meteorology, or do you have to go back and study systems, maybe even download level 2 radar, things of that nature, in order to go back and study a system?
Yeah, that's actually a really great way to put it. Yeah, I think there is that component, because even when you're tracking a storm in real time, there's only, you're trying to document things. I keep and my colleague William, we both keep weather logs, that we, as a month develops, we sort of copy down what we think are the most important things that have occurred. And we sort of try to stay on top of things as best we can, but inevitably at the end of the month, as we're sort of preparing to write the report, there's always little bits of information that may have slipped through the cracks, and so we find ourselves going back to the databases or there's a lot of great archive resources out there for radar, satellite, a variety of sources. NCEI has some great products. And other people have put up great archives as well. So we definitely go back and dig through that to mine everything really to the best that we can.
Very good. Thank you very much. James, back to you.
Thank you, Shay. And I'm actually going to go right back over to Eric, who I think has a question for Jordan as well. And then, Jordan, I'll have you take us through some of the highlights of the report. But first, I think Eric has a question regarding data.
I do. I wanted to just follow up briefly on the data sources that you're using. Of course, there's, especially when you're trying to trend data from one year to the next and so forth, data quality is an important part of that as well. So I'm kind of wondering, with changing of maybe build up around an ASOS station over the years, where you end up getting some bias in that, or if you're using things like CocoRAS and some of the other data that is going to have its kind of inherent biases in it. Do you account for that, or do you allow like NCEI and others to kind of do that quality assessment for you and then just use the end product?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I would say there's a mixture of it's sort of a mixed answer, I guess I'll put it. There's times when we sort of rely on. So, for example, if we're looking at an urban station, let's just say Miami, Florida, for example, we noticed that last year there was a tremendous number of days that it observed daily minimum temperatures that were above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It smashed its old annual record, and we believe that to be accurate, but there could be some change due to the siting and urban development around the airport where that station is. There could be some subtle influences of non-meteorological factors that are playing into those temperature measurements. Unfortunately, we don't directly account for some of those things in some of the numbers that we're reporting. We just simply report what that ASOS station recorded. However, and we sort of leave most of that sort of quality control to NCEI. However, if we do notice, and actually I have to give credit to William Schmitz, the service climatologist. This is something that he does quite a bit in his work, and he could probably speak to it better than I. But all the time he notices, data and quality control issues with station observations. As an example, during the recent winter storm that we had, he noticed that a lot of the co-op stations, or sort of the human observers, they were putting in snowfall totals in inches into the liquid equivalent precipitation column. So, basically they were reporting 5 inches of liquid equivalent precipitation when we knew that there was, that was not the case, that they were trying to report the snowfall total. So he would go through and request that all of those values be changed in the official ASIS database, as it's called. So we do actively engage in that type of quality control.
Thanks much. Appreciate it. Good.
So, Jordan, I want to hit on some of the highlights of the 2017 report, and we can continue to do this kind of in a Q&A fashion if you'd like, or
Sure.
Certainly I know you spent obviously a great amount of time on the report itself, and I don't know if you would like to lead us through that part of the discussion.
Whatever's easiest for you.
Well, I'll ask about this, and I know we touched upon it a moment ago with regards to tropical cyclones, both those that made landfall and didn't. The ones that did, just to quote here, those landfalling tropical cyclones contributed to at least 10% of the annual precipitation absorbed in portions of every state within the region. Mind you, again, your region including more than, of course, just our Carolinas here, but also Florida and the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and the like. I'm wondering if you had to slap a headline on the 2017 report, would it have something to do with these tropical cyclones that we saw in 2017?
Absolutely. Yeah, they were definitely one of the biggest headlines, if not the biggest headline. And honestly, I think a lot of that has to do also with what has happened recently in previous years prior to 2017. We had really been through a well-documented hurricane drought for portions of the region, particularly Florida. I think it had been since 2005 with Hurricane Wilma was the last time that a hurricane had made landfall in Florida prior to Hurricane Irma last year. So there had been, sort of this lull in hurricane activity overall. Now, I don't want to misstate. There were also, even during those relatively quiet years, we still had some very impactful storms like Sandy and Irene in 2011 and others. But it had been quite a while since we'd seen a season like this where we had a relatively high frequency of storms and also quite a few storms that were very intense and that made landfall as well. So I think all of those factors really came together to produce a kind of a blockbuster season.
Yeah, and I know
Jordan.
Go ahead, Shay.
Oh, sorry. I just want to supplement that real quick. Your reports are very, very detailed, and you talk about Hurricane Irma, citrus fruit losses that range from less than 30% to nearly 100% in groves across central and southern Florida. I mean, you talk about the quantity of fruit that dropped from trees due to high winds, 50-mile-per-hour wind stripping off immature nuts and blowing down pecan trees, and all kinds of things having to do with agriculture with these systems. Can you tell us a little bit how you gathered that data?
Yeah. So one thing, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's really, we consider ourselves weather geeks for sure at the Climate Center. And we're all into, gathering really interesting meteorological and climate stats, and the report is certainly full of that. But what we don't want to forget too is the human and societal impacts that are associated with that. And so we really try to focus on that as well in the reports. And so, there's a variety of different sources that I get that agricultural information from. One is the USDA agricultural reports that are actually issued weekly during the growing season, and then they're issued monthly, right now during the winter off season. And those are issued by state, so all of the states have their own reports, and they issue them regularly. And there's a lot of great sort of on-the-ground information that agricultural producers, ranchers, a wide, fruit and vegetable producers, they put in all sorts of great details that I really can mine and gather when we have significant events like a hurricane landfall, for example. Another key resource is Pam Knox. So she's an agricultural climatologist at UGA, the University of Georgia. I became acquainted with her. Dr. John Knox, her husband, was one of my professors there. And so she has been a tremendous resource for us. She has a blog that she posts a lot of really interesting agricultural articles that tie in, sort of examine the weather and climate linkages to agriculture. So I really mine her blog and some of the articles that she posts there.
And another
very good, James. Back to you.
Oh, thank you, Shay. Another example of that comes on the section about severe weather, where you guys talk about on May 30th, thunderstorm wind gusts estimated at 80 to 90 miles per hour caused trees to fall on several homes and vehicles across Sampson County, North Carolina. You may all remember that's also where the roof was ripped off the fire department, injuring at least 12. To Shay's point, approximately 16,000 turkeys were killed as the strong winds destroyed numerous poultry houses. I mean, like, again, just applauding the level of detail here across the board, because that was a detail that had slipped my mind, and I hope that you know that you're in good company tonight in terms of nerds who really appreciate all this data, because I think I got a little carried away with the highlighting on this page. I'm
Hey,
kind of
James.
tempted to read the whole thing. Yes, Scotty.
You're talking about severe weather, and I didn't want to take away from your notes, but that was the part that really stuck out to me with being in Western North Carolina and all the numerous tornadoes. But Jordan, looking at your report, a total of 312 tornadoes in the southeast. 65% of those was in the month of January, which I found fascinating. And it was the 5th most tornadoes reported in the southeast since records have been kept. I mean, that's amazing for last year of just how many tornadoes there was here in the southeast.
Definitely, the severe weather was definitely another key headline that really came out of last year's report. And there's just so many different nuggets that I could spend time on here. But you're right. I mean, the tornado activity across the region. I'm glad you got that map up that I produced to go along with the report. And so each of those triangles represents a confirmed, and these are all confirmed tornadoes, by the way. They're not just the sort of the LSR local storm reports. These are the confirmed tornadoes, and color coded by season. And and I think James mentioned this earlier. Georgia was really the epicenter of a lot of the tornado activity last year. It set, I believe, it set the state record for the most tornadoes that it's observed in its history going back to 1950. Over a third of those 312 tornadoes occurred in Georgia alone.
I think your report said 27 in one day and 41 in a 2-day time frame for tornadoes. I mean, that's Oklahoma, Kansas numbers right there.
Yeah, January was just off the charts. I remember that vividly. I'm actually grew up in central Georgia, actually right where that red triangle is in the center of the state. That's about where I grew up, and spent the first 16 years of my life there, near the city of Macon. January was just absolutely incredible in terms of just days and days of several different outbreaks that affected the state. And you're right, they set their daily record, their 2-day record. I believe the month of January was a record, and the year. So they basically, it was a full house if you're a poker fan. Really impressive. And unfortunately, I think one aspect that I highlighted, of the 17 fatalities and at least 91 injuries across the entire region that were caused by tornadoes, 16 of those 17 fatalities and at least 62 of the 91 injuries occurred in Georgia. So not only did we see the lion's share of the tornadoes themselves, unfortunately, we saw a lot of the human impacts there, which you might expect.
And
definitely so. And I was just going to, one other thing, and I'll give it back to you, James. One other thing I just found fascinating is, 4,059 severe weather reports. That's up 120% of normal. Obviously, the months of April, May, and July with those coming out. But my question to you is, doing the research, have you seen an uptick in severe weather? Obviously, last year's tornado, I don't want to say it's an anomaly because we do get tornadoes in the southeast, but it was kind of an uptick from that. But the overall scheme of doing this, do you guys find that there's more severe weather reports going on now in the southeast and maybe even tornadoes than what we've seen in the past?
That's a great question. I think so. It's a tricky issue because the severe storm report database that the SPC, or the Storm Prediction Center, which I get all of this data from, by the way, it's a great archive. I mean, it's very comprehensive in terms of their reporting and they categorize severe weather reports down into whether it's thunderstorm winds, straight line winds, tornadoes, and hail. But one issue with that is a reporting bias over time. And so we have to keep that in mind looking at some of these reports numbers, and especially when you're thinking about it in terms of trends over time. A lot of the earlier years, so say, so the database goes back to 1950. And so I would say from about 1950 to say 1980-ish or so, maybe even 1990, when the Doppler radar technology came online. That there was obviously fewer people that lived in the region. Technology was not nearly what it was today, and so severe weather just simply wasn't observed as much, and therefore it wasn't reported as consistently as it is today. So we have to be really, and actually at the Climate Center, we actually did a study looking at some of these reporting trends specifically for tornadoes. And we found that for tornadoes specifically, it's better to exclude F0s or EF0s when you're looking at trends over time, because those weakest tornadoes are often left out disproportionately in the earlier portion of the record, just because there were fewer people around to observe them. And, they're just weak and short-lived, and we didn't have Doppler radar to detect them. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that it's easy to look at that data record and say, oh, severe weather is really on the increase across the Southeast. But we would need to sort of account for the reporting and to detrend that, according to those biases that are in the reporting. But nonetheless, taking all of that into account, I would still say there's been quite not this winter, just from all of the cold that we've had, but there's been quite a few previous winters where we've seen higher than usual severe weather activity across the Southeast, and certainly 2017 was an example.
Definitely. One last point, and I'll toss it. I know Jared has a question. One last point, with as crazy as the tornado season was, Ashe County in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, recorded their first tornado ever. And if you're not familiar with Ashe County, that's on the border of Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. It's in the high mountains, and they indeed did have a tornado. I think it was from Tropical Storm Nate, when Nate was moving through the Southeast. So again,
right.
Just a crazy, crazy year for tornadoes in the Southeast.
That's a good example too of one of the key tornado myths out there is that tornadoes don't occur in mountains. It just doesn't work that way. Well, here's a good example of, yes, they aren't as common in elevated terrains like Western North Carolina, but they do occur when we have very powerful storm systems or a hurricane that's penetrating inland. They can produce tornadoes in mountainous areas. So that's, kind of an interesting example of debunking that popular myth.
Definitely so. James, or Jared, Shay, whoever.
Yeah, Jared hasn't.
Yeah, Jordan. Yeah, Jordan. When we think billion-dollar disasters, we think of hurricanes, we think of severe weather, we think of floods, things like that. But the first billion-dollar disaster was freeze. Very hard freeze that happened, and as it didn't happen abnormally late in the year, but we had very abnormal warmth during February that helped to get things blooming. Is the RCC finding that we're seeing more and more impacts from these kinds of freezes towards the end of the year, or towards the end of the season and the beginning of the growing season there?
I think it's certainly it's troublesome at times, to really diagnose some of these freeze events, because I think the key point that you made there is that this, the freeze last March, it wasn't particularly late or unusually late in the spring season, but nonetheless, we still had tremendous impacts from that particular freeze. And like you mentioned, a lot of that had to do with the prior winter season, where it was just persistently warm throughout, extending from December all the way through February. And so a lot of these fruit crops in particular, they weren't able to accumulate what agricultural producers refer to as chill hours. And so it's defined as an hour of time in which the air temperature is 45 degrees or less. And so these chill hours are really important for fruit crops to kind of remain dormant during the winter season, and so that they don't bud prematurely in, say, late February going into March, which would make them more vulnerable to a spring freeze, whether it's early in the season or late. And so, unfortunately, we saw kind of the worst case scenario develop last winter going into the spring, where we had essentially, some of the fewest chill hours that have been recorded on record for some of these crops. And unfortunately, that freeze came at a very unfortunate time and destroyed a lot of the peach crop in particular in Georgia and South Carolina, and also blueberries as well.
I'm going to follow up on that question and screen share here for you a observed snowfall analysis from the event in the middle of December, a couple weeks before Christmas. We'll stay on the cold weather topic here for a minute. This was pretty phenomenal as well. I know several snow records were set out of this event. Suburban Atlanta with multiple inches of snow. You're seeing 6 inches in east of Birmingham. What kind of stands out to you from this event? A little bit different than maybe something that's is going to cause a lot of damage, but certainly a notable event.
Definitely, yeah. This was a really interesting storm in a couple of regards. First is just the a very long, broad swath of snowfall extending. I mean, even outside of our region, all the way down to New Orleans and portions of southern Louisiana, all the way up to past Richmond, Virginia, into the eastern shore of Virginia and Maryland and Delaware. Just a really long continuous swath of snow. And I believe Mobile, Alabama, they recorded 1 inch with this system, and that was their earliest snowfall on record. So if we think earliest in terms of starting a winter season in December, this was their earliest on record. And then the other big feature of this particular storm system is just that bullseye there in kind of northwest of Atlanta, where some of the heaviest snowfall totals were recorded in this entire system, beating out in some cases portions of western North Carolina that benefit from topography, high elevation, so places like I think Dallas, northwest of Atlanta, a co-op station that. Several stations that observed their highest one-day snowfall for any month on record, not just December. So I think there were at least 3 of those stations northwest of Atlanta. Thankfully, that bullseye was not directly over the city of Atlanta and didn't cause another snowpocalypse or snowmageddon like we observed several years ago. That could have been a nightmare, but nonetheless, we did see some pretty significant impacts from this in terms of transportation and power outages and so forth.
And Jordan, I have one more question for you. Sorry, James. I wanted to ask, I know we talked a little bit about this briefly before the show, not getting into the matrix for the air temperatures and any of that, but do you look at the ENSO phasing, which is the La Nina and El Nino phasing, as part of your studies? Do you correlate any of this information with the ENSO cycles?
We don't. I wouldn't say that we, sort of directly, perform those types of analyses. We don't, directly correlate what we're looking at, in sort of a research perspective. Although that's, certainly interesting. But we do definitely keep in mind, what phase of the ENSO cycle we're in and how that could be operating in terms of the regional climate of the Southeast. I mean, the Southeast does, as you know, it has a very distinct El Nino, La Nina signature at times, although there can be some variability in terms of the temperature and precipitation response. And I think we're seeing some of that this winter, even though we're in a La Nina, and we have seen an uptick in drought conditions. It's going to be interesting to see how that finishes out here in February, but definitely ENSO is a very important teleconnection that we take into account. Also, other teleconnections like the NAO is a big one, especially during the winter season. So this for viewers, this is the North Atlantic Oscillation. Basically looks at sea level pressure patterns between the northern Atlantic and sort of the central Atlantic or further to the south. And, it seems like we've been in, we've had some periods in the NAO negative pattern where we've had a lot of high pressure or blocking patterns over Greenland. And so that's allowed a lot of lot of trophiness or areas of low pressure to really persistently park themselves, if you will, over parts of the southeast. And I think that's kind of been the part of the story so far this winter with all the persistent cold that we've had, is just this kind of pattern, this teleconnection pattern sort of locking in place.
Jordan, I think we hit on a lot of the highlights that we picked out from the report, but as we head towards the 1 hour mark of our broadcast this evening, I wanted to give you the opportunity to share anything that maybe jumped out at you or stood out or stands out as you look back at the report you compiled for 2017.
Yeah, let's see here. I think we covered a lot of stuff. The drought situation was kind of interesting last year, and it wasn't necessarily a huge story, especially compared to 2016. In the latter part of 2016, especially autumn, we had a very intense drought that gripped a lot of the southeast, and it led to one of the worst wildfire seasons that we've seen in parts of the region, particularly North Carolina. And the Gatlinburg, Tennessee fire was one of those prevalent fires, really destructive as well. So we were kind of moving out of that into the beginning of 2017. And you can kind of, I'm glad you brought that graphic up. You can really see there in January and February, moving into March, sort of the vestiges or the remnants of that drought with, D2 and D3 severe to extreme drought still kind of anchored in parts of Alabama and Georgia, and even parts of Western Carolinas. But we got some really beneficial rainfall during the late winter and into the spring season that really, cut down on that interior drought. But what was happening at sort of the same time was that we saw an emergence rather of drought conditions in southern Georgia and in much of Florida. And that led to an extremely active wildfire season in those areas. We saw the West Mims fire was a huge fire in the Okefenokee Swamp that caused a lot of ecological damage there locally, but also we saw tourist reductions to that area, even along the Atlantic beaches that were nearby. So we also saw ash and smoke that descended on Jacksonville, Florida for a couple of days from that fire. So, really impactful fire season. And then, the pattern kind of changed again, and we saw the rains return during the summer, the wet season for Florida. That really helped them out. So, long story short, I guess what I'm getting, there's kind of been this oscillation and drought from the interior portion of the region to some of the more coastal areas. And now we're, I think we lately, within the past few months, we've seen the switch back to a drier interior and a wetter coastal area. And certainly the tropical cyclones eliminated any vestiges of the coastal drought, especially in Florida. But it's just a kind of interesting seesaw pattern, if you will, that kind of noticed, between different areas of drought in the region.
Well, I know we are only 2 months here into 2018. You did an outstanding job with the 2017 report, and I understand the January snapshot is out, January of this year. So how does this year look like it's starting off for us?
Cold, believe it or not, below average temperatures, which is something that we have not seen in quite a while, at least to the intensity that we saw during January. So below average temperatures, dryness continued across, much of the region, although we did see start to see some improvements towards the end of the month with the rainfall, wetter pattern returning. So hopefully that will continue throughout February as well. Severe weather has been extremely quiet so far this winter, especially compared to last winter. I think we've only had less than half a dozen confirmed tornadoes since December 1st. Severe, and obviously there's a good correlation between, these really cold patterns and shutting off any kind of thunderstorm activity. So those really go hand in hand. That's kind of where we stand right now.
Appreciate that snapshot there very much. As we come up on the 1 hour mark of our broadcast, I'll invite our listeners to stay tuned because I know Jared Smith is going to be giving us a breakdown of an event many of you will probably remember for some time if you were living along the coast in regards to this week's false tsunami warning. But before we do that, I promised Jordan, and we were looking forward to this as well too, so I wanted to give you some time to kind of walk us through the Southeast Regional Climate Center's website to show off some of these tool sets that are available not only to you guys, but to the general public as well too.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to do that here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully that will work. Does everything look okay on your end?
Let's switch on over to that web page. I think right now we're looking at Google Hangouts. It's doing a little bit of an inception thing, and I think we're looking at it now. Yep, we got it.
Got it. Okay, good. So yeah, the first thing I wanted to show. Well, let me go back here just to the home page. So this is CERC.com. CERC being short for Southeast Regional Climate Center. So this is our home page. We've got a nice. If you scroll down a little bit, we've got this rotating series of maps here in the middle, just kind of showing snapshots of our climate perspectives tool, and whether it be temperatures, the values, temperature rankings like this particular map. So it just kind of scrolls through it, but I'll give you a short demo of climate perspectives here in just a second. And then some of our featured products here over in this right-hand column. But before I do that, I want to give a little plug here to the users. We just started a new subscription service. So if you are interested in receiving our monthly, quarterly, and annual reports in an email, regular email, you can subscribe here just by typing in your email, and we promise we won't, send you any spam or anything like that, or share it with anybody else. So the website address is CERC.com/subscribe. So really easy, straightforward thing to sign up for. One other web page I want to show you is where you can. We have an archive of our monthly and annual, and also our quarterly reports. So if you want to see, any of our previous reports that we published, we have a couple of pages set up for that. So if you, from our homepage, if you go to the climate data tab at the top and scroll down to monthly/seasonal climate information, that will bring you to this page. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a section Southeast Monthly Climate Report. And we've started the archive back last summer. But you can also, if you want to go back even before that, the section just above that actually has all of the reports going back to June 2003. So this is kind of a nice archive for those reports, monthly and annual. And we have a different page set up for our quarterly climate impacts and outlook reports. And these are in a little bit of a different format than the monthly and annuals. We partner with NCEI and also our some of our state climatologists and a lot of our partners across the region to produce these reports. And so we have a nice archive of those, and also any special reports that we issue. This was one we produced for that fall 2016 drought that I talked about. So we have all of those hyperlinked here for you. So I wanted to spend just a minute or two showing Southeast Climate Perspectives, which is a tool we developed to basically take a variety of station data across the region and to place current conditions, historical conditions of temperature or precipitation, and put those in a historical or climate perspective, sort of comparing temperatures that were observed yesterday. How did those rank compared to the historical record, or what was the departure from average? How different from average was it? So I'll just show this tab here called Regional Map Perspectives. It's a really cool tool here that shows you all of the different first order stations. And so these are the automated airport stations, here's the one for Raleigh-Durham area. And we also have co-op stations in here. So these are the citizen observer observations that are incorporated into the database. So just to kind of show you, how powerful this tool is, one thing you can do, let's just take a look and see for last year, annual temperatures last year, where did they rank? So, we talked about how exceptionally warm portions of the region were. So let's just kind of show that in a map perspective. So we'll drop down here in this date selection box. I'll choose December 31st. And we'll choose year to date so that we'll look at the entire year of 2017. You notice that I chose mean temperature as the variable. So that's the average of the daily maximum and the daily minimum temperature. And let's look at the rankings because there were quite a few exceptional rankings. So we'll click Show Perspectives. And you see a new map pops up here with the legend over here at the right showing kind of color coding how the mean annual temperatures across the region ranked for individual stations. And so, you can see here that a lot of them are shaded in sort of the light red and dark red. So that indicates they're anywhere from their 5th warmest to all the way up to their warmest on record. A bunch of stations like, let's see, I think Augusta's here somewhere. Yeah, there's Augusta and others. So if another way you can look at this, departures from normal, so we'll change that. So you can see pretty much the entire region was above average, so anywhere from +1 to +4 degrees Fahrenheit or more above average. So really cool tool that we developed at the center that allows you to analyze temperature and precipitation data in a variety of different ways. So one other quick page that we developed, this is not just a Southeastern tool, we actually expanded it to incorporate all of the different regions that are reflective of the 6 regional centers. We also have a continental US map perspective that we developed, and so that'll pop up here. And let me just zoom in a little bit. And so we actually have, and in this version, the national version, we actually just have the automated stations here. I don't believe we have the co-op stations incorporated in this version. So just to show you a quick example, if we want to take a look at last month, so January, what did temperatures look like across the continental US? We'll produce a map that looks like this. And it's really cool to kind of, these patterns where we have such a different regime in the Western United States versus the Southeastern and Southern United States. It really I think the colors really show that out well. We had, a lot of high pressure and ridging in the Western US. So you see all of the warmer than average temperatures across the West. And in contrast, we had a lot of troughing in the jet stream or lower pressure, which yielded colder or below average temperatures across the Southeast. And so you can kind of connect what's going on in the atmosphere to what we see in the temperature departures from normal. So I'll stop there with that. But that link, by the way, is if you go to climate data and scroll all the way towards the bottom, climate perspective links, that's where you can find that there. Let's see here. I think those were the main highlights that I wanted to show for our website.
Well, I appreciate that tour very much. We've got it up on the screen, Southeast Regional Climate Center, SERCC.com, if you're listening to the podcast version of our show tonight. And Jordan, thank you again for the report that you shared with us tonight. We'll be sure to link that out, and people can go to your website as well, too, if they want to kind of deep dive on all of these specifics. You're welcome to stick around as we wrap up our show here with a little overtime special. We'll go back on down to Charleston, South Carolina in just a second, but I almost completely forgot, and I'm sure Scotty Powell would have corrected me, but Jordan, I need to give you time to share your social media handles with us for you and or the center, so the folks who are listening to our show can get in touch with you guys if they have any questions to reach out directly to you.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So my personal handle is, or on Facebook, you can find me Jordan McLeod, obviously, is me, but also the Southeast Regional Climate Center. We have both a Facebook page and a Twitter page as well. So let me quickly pull those up here, and then I'll share my screen again.
And as you're doing that, I'll remind folks who are listening tonight from our kind of our extended coverage area outside the Carolinas that these guys are doing more than just North Carolina and South Carolina. So if you're watching us maybe in Phoenix City, Alabama tonight on our telecast there, they've got information for you as well.
Great. So here's so here's our Facebook page at the Regional Climate Center. And yeah, just Southeast Regional Climate Center, CERC. And so you can come here and like our page. William Schmitz posts at least once a day, if sometimes multiple times per day. Does a great job, updating everybody. Whether when we release a report, like we just published that the January report today. So here's the social media post for that on Facebook, and then we also have our Twitter page, which is at SERCC. And so there's me.
I like that retweet.
Yeah, I know. That's it looks really good. I think I recognize that guy.
Yeah, I like his hat.
So it'd be great. We try to do our best to really share and push out information as much as possible, and we love for folks to share the stuff that we put out there. So be glad to have you tag along.
I appreciate that very much, and thank you again, Jordan, to you and your colleagues for all this great data. Again, you're welcome to stick around as we head into OT and head down to Jared Smith.
Jordan, thanks again. That was really fantastic. I use RCC data constantly to pull out really random weird stats for my followers on my social media. So it's one of many great uses for it. Keep up the great work. It's awesome. So
appreciate that.
So everybody from Texas up to Maine had a little bit of a scare. You had the AccuWeather app installed yesterday. Around 8:30 or so, routine test of the tsunami warning system was run by the National Tsunami Forecast Center, and came to grab that and send it out to everybody. And it was a very interesting problem to try and figure out what the heck happened. So let me just share what this looked like real quick. I'm gonna just go through a series of tweets. And when we look at this is from Post and Courier in Charleston, and clearly everybody freaking out. I know Scotty and everybody on NWS was getting messages from all the local weather forecast offices saying there was no tsunami warning. It was a little crazy. It was a little crazy. But AccuWeather, for some reason, grabbed this test and pushed it out to everybody as a tsunami warning. If you click through, if you tap through, you would see that it was a test, and like, okay, you can breathe. You don't have to run to high ground. But unlike the guy who replied to the Post and Courier, the guy from Hawaii did not find a new job. Let me just make that completely clear. This is not a Hawaii thing. This is nothing like that. The Weather Service translated it mostly correctly. AccuWeather parsed it pretty forgivingly, but mostly correctly. And so, when you have a situation like this, often you find that it's kind of a confluence of events, and that's certainly what happened here. So it was kind of fun to do a little Twitter sleuthing on this, and I put together a little thread on Twitter, on my personal Twitter, and first thought was, okay, AccuWeather didn't see the it didn't see the test text in the product, and it said test. I mean, here's what it looked like. But there's a little clue at the bottom of this. We're gonna get back to that in a second. But you see test all over the place. No big deal, right? And it wasn't coded with the usual Valentine extent code. And what the heck is Valentine extent code? So let's get really nerdy with it here. This is frightening to anybody who has never dealt with parsing Weather Service text products, but we'll look at this PV text string here. And what this is basically a bunch of code that says, what kind of product is it? Is it operational? Is it a test? What is it? Is it a new warning? Is it a continued warning? Et cetera, et cetera. What office issued it? What kind of phenomena is it? Is it a tsunami? Is it a tornado? Is it a severe thunderstorm? significance? Is it a warning, a watch, things like that? The ETN, the event tracking number, we'll get to that, back to that in just a second. And then start and end times for it as well. And so you'll note that, we didn't quite get that. So that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with these tests that were being issued, because as it turned out, it sent one copy that had all of these things. This is a follow-up message, and it had all of these UC county codes here. And then there's your VTech with the test there. Incremented. But yeah, it was an interesting confluence of events. We thought, okay, maybe it was a truncated message. Maybe it was, maybe AccuWeather's parser for some reason. Maybe somebody did a code push and reverted all the stuff that said look for test. But with Daryl Hersman, father of NWS Chat from Iowa State, and he's got these are his 2 cents, and it makes sense. Number one, the tsunami products are a little weird. There's typical policy directives that are in place, very strict format that you can validate against. It's all published on the web. If you're looking for a great way to spend time with friends at parties, you can pull out the NWS, the product descriptions there, and you can really, you will be the most popular guy there. Everything was coded with a test, but this third part here where it said the event tracking number 3 was reused and should not have been. Devin Boyer, who works at Mapbox, which is it's a mapping company. They kind of compete with Google Maps. They have beautiful web maps. But he's also a meteorologist, a Penn State grad. And what had happened was the test used an event tracking number that had been used previously with the tsunami threat that originated a couple weeks ago, the 24th of January, where we had that earthquake that happened in the Pacific, and we were very concerned about Kodiak, Alaska, and those areas. And so the test reused event tracking number 3. And so AccuWeather's parser, presumably without having any sort of knowledge of how AccuWeather's parser works, saw that and assumed it was an update and pushed out that update to that original event. So that is probably the best theory of what happened. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of finger pointing. I'll freely admit, I was like, well, wait a second. It says test. It clearly says test. The Weather Service did nothing wrong. Actually, yeah, there was something slightly wrong. Just that one little number didn't increment from 3 to 4. Made all the difference in the world. This is that after all was said and done, the Tsunami Warning Center issued another tsunami warning that said there was no tsunami warning. So this is a test product and everything, and this is the after test product. And my Weather Channel app had an active tsunami warning in effect later that morning. So certainly a very interesting situation, but as you can see, we're all high and dry. No tsunamis to be seen. And so as a result, it's a very complex programming problem. It's very, when you get systems like this, it usually takes a confluence of events for things to go wrong like this. And it just happened to be that you combine this one weird ETN with this test product that went through. Most parsers rejected it. You didn't really see alerts from anybody else. But in the case of AccuWeather, it was like, hey, this looks like an update. Push it out. So that's what happened. That's what I think happened. I would love to hear, if I know that there's probably proprietary stuff involved. AccuWeather probably isn't going to get into the details of it. I know that they were a little mad about NWS pointing figures, and there's just a lot of finger pointing in weather Twitter. But ultimately, the long and short of it is that the Weather Enterprise has some work to do. Blame is usually shared, and in this case it was. And no, the guy from Hawaii is not working at AccuWeather.
Jared, thank you very much. That was extremely insightful, so appreciate that. I guess really a big question is, what do we do if there is one here? We've never been through that kind of exercise before, so that's definitely something maybe we could do another show on, and maybe have Stephen Jamais from the College of Charleston come back on, since he was on with us a couple years back when there's a lot of earthquake activity going on. But what do we do along our coastline? We can't even get a 2-day evacuation right for a hurricane, What do we do when there's a tsunami? These are great questions. So it might be a good time to visit that topic sometime this year. So thank you for all your information.
Mm-hmm.
And
when you write National Weather Service parsers for fun, that's what happens. So there you go.
And I was just going to echo that point. I feel like I understand what happened now so much clearer and so much better than I did yesterday, as so many of us were trying to figure out what was going on. So nice detective work, Mr. Smith. And with that, we'll go ahead and look to start wrapping up our show. But before we do, I know a couple of us have some tweets of the week we wanted to very quickly share, including our guest tonight, Jordan, who brought a tweet along. So if you've got that up, I can make my way over to you. But while you work to pull that up, I think Jared's got his. So let's go to Jared real fast.
Yeah, why the heck not? One more from me. So, y'all watched the Falcon Heavy launch. That was incredible. It was just phenomenal. And watching the rockets land next to each other, and then the Tesla, now on its way to an orbit that will circle Mars. I mean, but William Churchill over at National Weather Service in Memphis caught a really cool thermal signature from Goes East, Go 16. Falcon Heavy was launching. I'm going to try and zoom in on this a little bit. Let's see if the zoom actually works. Oh, yeah, there it is. So, yeah, so there's your this is on water vapor imagery. I think this was mid-level, as I recall, and there's your little thermal signature right there of the rocket. And there's also plenty of other there's other visible image out there. You can see the heat settling at the launch pad there, but this is really cool as it was racing up into orbit with Starman and Elon's Roadster. So again, if you missed that Falcon Heavy launch, I really, 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 really strongly encourage that you watch it. It was awe-inspiring. I really enjoyed it.
And if you did miss it for any reason, you could watch it on our platforms: YouTube, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, and the like. I think I said YouTube twice to see all those spectacular images. Is that what you got for us as well, Shay? You got that glorious view there from the dash?
I sure do. And the bottom picture are the two side cores that are returning back to the landing pads, which is amazing in itself. I think we just being in this day and age, seeing this kind of technology is incredible. Now the central core, I'm not sure what happened there. It was a little foggy. I think they went offline. I don't think it made it back to its pad in the Pacific.
I think
I'm not entirely sure of that, but yeah, we're not sure exactly what happened there. But the beautiful thing is that the two side cores did return and landed simultaneously, and Starman is out and about, floating in space. Now he's going to be in an elliptical orbit inside of his car, his Roadster, his Tesla Roadster, for about the next 200, maybe 400 million years. So maybe the sun may taint that paint a little bit. There's been all kinds of debate about that, but will it stay red? Will the sun's radiation turn it white? We don't know, but it's going to be out there for a really long time. Pretty neat stuff. I tell you, just like Jared said, if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, watch it. And you can watch Starman live on YouTube. Just put Starman in YouTube. It should be like one of the first ones that comes up. And let's see.
I'll go ahead and share my tweet real fast as we look at some of the video from yesterday. Keeping with our space theme, I found this while I was doing some reading from the Washington Post about an amateur radio operator who was listening. He was actually looking, if you remember, there have been a couple spy satellite launches recently, and he was trying to find one of those. And what he accidentally came across was an image satellite. That's actually the name of it, IMAGE, an old NASA satellite that had gone up to look at space weather some years ago, and as I understand it, some solar effects as well too. NASA had lost contact with it, and while he was scanning the skies, came across the satellite. A really interesting piece on how they thought the computer had essentially become frozen in space, not literally frozen, but to borrow the PC term, it became unresponsive. They have a theory on how it reset itself and how this guy managed to find it, and so they've been trying to figure out what to do with it after regaining contact for the first time in 12 years. I thought that was a really cool story. Jordan, what did you bring for us?
Yeah, so let's see here. So continuing on the Starman theme with the launch of the rocket tropical cyclone Siebel photobomb here from Starman. So you can kind of see here in the background the tropical cyclone. So I thought that was a pretty cool image continuing on this theme. And then a little funnier version, I thought, the MARTA bus. Yeah, made it.
Oh, that's perfect. That is perfect. It's just like Levi to put something like that up for his tweet, but this is hilarious. That's Matt Lanza for you, folks.
Oh, that's great.
That's real good. Thank you for bringing that along, Jordan. Is Jordan our first guest to actually bring a tweet of the week?
I think so.
So Gold Star A+, not only to your report, but also for remembering to bring a tweet. I know we had a full-packed show tonight. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. I'm going to go ahead and change that lower third because it's a little outdated as we head over to Scotty Powell to wrap up tonight's show and tell you what's coming up in future weeks right here on the Carolina Weather Group.
I feel so bad because I really didn't get into the space launch yesterday, and you guys have all geeked out about it. So now I'm going to have to go brush up on that. But yeah, thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on tonight. Next week, we have the week off as many folks will be celebrating the Valentine's holiday. But after that, we have Samantha Berksett. She is a artist / meteorologist. So she's going to be joining us on the 21st to talk about how art and meteorology have come together for her passion of painting and making all kinds of artistic things dealing with weather. And then to close out the month of February, I'm not sure, Shay, I've seen our email earlier today. I don't think we have a guest confirmed yet for the 28th, but we're going to be talking about the new GOES, I guess it's GOES R or GOES S, that's going to be launched on March 1st. We're going to have folks on the 28th, February 28th, talking to us about that. But from my understanding, Shay, on our email, we don't have a guest confirmed yet, correct?
Yeah, no, NOAA Officer John Leslie, we're in contact. You and I are in contact with him. And he said, don't worry, we will have a top-notch guest joining us for that launch to talk about it. So it is the GOES S, which will be allocated to the West Coast. So we had GOES R, which was allocated to GOES East, which is now GOES 16. This one will be GOES West, the replacement for that one. So, looking forward to it. We'll have both the country, will have the tropics. It's going to be amazing. We're just, and then we have 2 more satellites going after that. So, exciting times.
So we're not sure who's going to be joining us that night, but we are going to, like Shay said, John did promise us to have an expert with us on the 28th. And then the month of March, we start the National Weather Podcast Month, and we're excited about that as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on and start promoting that. But it looks like a fun and exciting time here as the Carolina Weather Group continues through the year 2018. So we're well past our allotted time, so we'll go ahead and log off this evening. But we want to thank you for watching us here at the Carolina Weather Group. And as always, make sure that you like our social media pages, Twitter and Facebook, and follow us on those platforms, as well as downloading our podcasts on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or TuneIn Radio. Numerous ways to be able to listen to our podcast. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great week. Have a great week. Next week we'll be off. So I think James had said earlier that we may be playing a rebroadcast of one of our favorite shows, but next week we're off, and then we'll be back joining you on the 21st of February. Have a great week, and we'll see you then. And 17 edition. edition of our little podcast, our little weather get together. And tonight we're happy to have on Dr. Marshall Shepard with us. You know Marshall from the Weather Channel's Weather Geeks. He's also a professor at the University of Georgia and writes for Forbes.com. So Marshall, a little bit of everything in the weather world. So we're pleased to have Marshall joining us for our the third year. So this has become an annual thing for Marshall to join us here towards the latter part of December. So we appreciate having Marshall back with us. We are live tonight, so there's numerous ways you can follow us along with the conversation. You can watch us on the Facebook Live or Periscope or our YouTube Live setting as well. And if you're listening on the rebroadcast or the podcast later on, you can listen through many of our podcast downloads, Google Play and things like that. So again, live broadcast. If you want to interact with us tonight, please feel free to. You can tweet us at Carolina WX Group or comment on either of the live streams. We'll be monitoring those throughout the night and make sure if you have any questions, we get them to Mr. Shepard. So with that, we are kind of running on some time. So we're going to skip the introductions this evening and we'll save weather talk for after 9 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to give it to Ricky Matthews, who is in a different location tonight. Ricky, it looks like you're covering for the Chief.
Yeah, it's one of those weeks where everyone takes off and weekenders take over, as I like to say. But we're still watching that potential for a few snowflakes. Everyone's still excited about that. But the big story is like 3 or 4 inches of rain before that. So lots to talk about tonight. But Dr. Shepard, so glad to have you join us once again. Like Scotty said, this has really become a yearly tradition, and we're so glad you could join us.
Hey, I'm glad we could make it work. Now, the recent outage in Atlanta killed all our Weather Geeks tapings this week, so I'm actually available. Actually, we were good for tonight anyhow.
How widespread was that outage? Did it actually impact parts of the metro, or?
No, it was just, I don't know if your viewers or listeners, the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport, which is the busiest airport in the world and hub for Delta and many other airlines. I think they were out of power maybe about 6 hours or so Sunday afternoon, but maybe even longer than that. But it literally just shut down the entire system, and so people couldn't get in for Sunday and Monday. We were taping 2 Weather Geeks Monday night, but we had to cancel that because both guests that we were flying in couldn't get in.
Gotcha. Well, it's kind of ironic that we get to the end of the year and something like that shuts down a major airport. We've had so many cities this year kind of shut down by major weather disasters. Let's kind of start from the beginning. Anything that stands out to you? I know we were going into 2017, and there was a lot of, especially early in the hurricane season, talk about what this season would be like with El Nino, La Nina, and the Enzo. Anything that kind of stands out in the early part of the year to you?
Yeah, well, we weren't in an El Nino, so obviously that sets the stage for certain things we could expect throughout the year anyhow. And I think, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the hurricane season certainly bore out the promises of what many of the projections were suggesting. But if you guys recall, earlier in the year, we had some pretty significant severe weather outbreaks in the South, parts of the Midwest. There were a couple of significant high-risk days that were issued. So even we talked a little bit about that with Angela Fritz from Capital Weather Gang on Weather Geeks last week. Just those high-risk days that early and sort of the notion that those were issued, that kind of got some folks' attention even earlier on. So I don't know what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, remember the Georgia high-risk day that kind of there was some storms. I don't think as many as expected. There was a Florida high-risk day. I think maybe they were the same exact days, but that one stands out to me earlier in the year.
Yeah, it was just kind of unusual. And, we were talking about that for 15 and 16, we didn't have any high-risk days at all. And then we had those earlier in the season. For here in Georgia, I guess for some time, though, we were kind of tornado capital here in my home state for a while earlier this year. And then, of course, earlier in the year, I guess it was around February or so, we had the flooding up in California. I mean, I think that was kind of a significant story in itself. You had the dam break there, or the dam breach, or the spillway issues going on, if you guys remember that, in California. So, just sort of interesting that we went from sort of feast to famine in the sense that we went from this really wet period earlier in the year to now dry period, the Santa Ana winds, the Diablo winds that we saw earlier in the year with the fires up in the Bay Area and the wine country. So, I mean, 2017 gave us all anything you wanted, we had.
The one thing kind of stands out to me, though, was this, besides the storms in the Southeast, I can't remember many big tornado outbreak days this year in the Central Plains in typical Tornado Alley. Any reason you think that may be the case?
No, I think we'd have to. You got to have this guy named Ashton White on. He actually is very good at sort of this notion of the El Nino, La Nina, and outbreaks in the Midwest. Yeah, if you're interested in some of that sort of work, definitely look up some of his papers that he's published. But there's been people that have speculated about the relationship between sort of neutral to sort of trending to a La Nina pattern and what that means for outbreaks. Victor Gensini, who I don't know if you've had him on Carolina Weather Group, certainly his work looking at sort of the sort of angular momentum pattern of the jet stream suggests that there are some clues to why we weren't seeing those outbreak days. By the way, shout out to Victor Gensini. Go check out his website because he is doing some long-term forecasting using this sort of angular momentum. He kind of has this really, I don't know all the details of his calculation, but he looks at how wavy the jet stream patterns are the wave train patterns around the world, and he comes up with this calculation in terms of outbreak prediction, and he's keeping track of the statistics. So check it out and see how he's doing.
We'll get our chief booking officer, Scotty Powell, on that one and get him on here pretty soon.
Gensini will definitely come on. He's at Northern Illinois now. He used to be at College of DuPage. So
we had Victor on, but I will have to reach out to Ashton White. That sounds like an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this guys are all about teleconnections all around the globe. It's really fascinating work they do.
Yeah, the teleconnections. I'm sure you've got a very weather geek or weather attentive audience, but for those that maybe just kind of popping in, these teleconnections are these things that happen where you get a large-scale change happening somewhere around the globe, but it impacts somewhere else downstream. The most famous example, obviously, is what happens with El Nino or La Nina, where you get changes in the jet stream pattern, which impacts weather in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. There's another interesting one that one of my colleagues at the University of Georgia, James knows him, Dr. Tom Moat, has done some work where he looks at the snow cover in Siberia, and he can determine some things about what our winters are going to be like and summers based on snow cover over in Siberia. So that's another interesting teleconnection. So when we're talking about things like Ricky's question about outbreaks and outbreak days, we certainly have to look at the short-term weather patterns, but we also have to look at these sort of teleconnections and what they mean for jet stream patterns and the ability to support the type of tornadic outbreak days that we would expect.
2017, one of the things that stands out to me, big advancements in weather technology between GOES-R, we had a GFS upgrade, I believe, and a few other weather models continuing to be upgraded.
The NAM was upgraded, and I'm going to mention that because in our recent snow here in Atlanta that essentially gave us almost a foot in some parts of Atlanta, the NAM model sniffed that out, but no, everybody was like, "Ask the NAM." So.
Yeah, not only that, we got the February storm last year, or I'm sorry, earlier this year. It got that one by the back end of the winter season too. It was really, it's really something to watch nowadays. The 3 kilometer.
Yeah, Shay, I think that's right. I think we have to get used to the fact that the NAM has been upgraded. It's still not the Euro, but I think we need to probably pay a bit more attention to it than perhaps some of us do.
Talk about GOES 16 and GOES-R for a minute.
Yeah.
If you had to sum that up in just a few words, how would you sum up that satellite and the changes it's made?
2 words: game changer. It's one of the things that we see with GOES 16. I think it's now officially GOES East. It went from this sort of GOES-R to GOES 16 to now it's officially in its parking orbit as GOES East. I mean, the spatial and temporal resolution of this thing is providing views of the weather at the scale the weather is happening, whether we're talking about a rapidly evolving supercell system with overshooting tops and perhaps in the IR, the warm V-notch. For those of you that had some satellite meteorology, you know that in addition to the overshooting tops, that can bring down some warm air into the anvil region of the cloud, and you'll get a warm brightness temperature. I'm pulling off some of my SatMet from University of Georgia I just taught this semester. But the point in that is we can actually see that at the scale that it's actually happening because of the time resolution and spatial resolution. Same thing as I was looking at the hurricane season, looking at some of the eye-wall replacement cycle and some of the mega hurricanes that we saw this summer. And GOES 16 is allowing us to really kind of look at what I like to say is look at the weather at the scale the weather is happening rather than trying to interpolate or infer it. And of course, the other big game changer on Go 16 is the geostationary lightning mapper. I mean, that's a one of its kind instrument. We've got a lightning mapper in a geosynchronous orbit giving us continuous views of lightning. While that's interesting from the standpoint that, oh yeah, look, there's lightning there in the Midwest, there may be some relationships between the lightning activity and something that your viewers may be familiar with called the 2 sigma jump. Sort of this notion of lightning activity and the sort of statistical properties of its activity may hint at tornadic activity. So that opens up all kinds of new pathways for not only forecasting, but also research.
Yeah,
and don't forget JPSS just launched too. I always say GOES 16 is kind of like the shiny sports car on the lot at the car dealership, but JPSS is the old workhorse truck. Not as flashy, but the data that's coming from those polar orbiting satellites, or a lot of what's being assimilated or fed into the GFS and the Euro model. So.
I was just about to bring that up. I was going to say, viewers know you used to work at NASA at one time. JPSS, one that didn't get a ton of attention, but one, to me, is kind of a hidden gem in the weather satellite era.
Yeah, there's so many hidden gems. I think the average weather enthusiast knows about GOES and perhaps JPSS, but the GPM satellite, which is one of the missions that I helped develop when I was at NASA, and various others. There are a ton of data sets. People always get into the whole Euro versus GFS and why it's better. The bottom line, folks, whoever's listening, is that the European model trends to be a little bit better because of the data assimilation scheme that they're using. Data assimilation means they have data coming into the model. They use a 4-dimensional or 4D data assimilation, which means that they can map out the atmosphere 3-dimensionally, but then they're updating it in time because of this sort of the faster computers that they use, and they're feeding in all of the satellite data, JPSS, the instruments from that, GPM radiances for rainfall. So that's the reason, in a nutshell. It's not, well, I guess it is kind of rocket science because we're talking about satellites, but it's not really rocket science because it's really the data assimilation, the faster computers. 90+% of satellite data is assimilated into these models. So if we all of a sudden take those satellite data sets out of the models, we're going to have a lot of busted forecasts all over the place.
Let's talk about changes for a second, because we got early in this year, obviously we had a new administration change, and we had some fears of budget issues and budget concerns, and we have lost a few programs. We've kind of increased budgets in a few other departments. Give us just kind of an overview of the changes we've seen and maybe the changes we will see in 2018.
Well, with the new administration coming in, their initial budget was just ridiculous for weather. I mean, it really cut NOAA's satellite program, the Office of Research. It was cutting out things like the Sea Grant program. North Carolina and South Carolina are both Sea Grant states, as is Georgia. It was just frankly, a disaster budget, but bipartisanship in Congress actually has really been our friend, Republican and Democrat alike in the Senate and Congress, because they realize that weather and climate information coming from NOAA and NASA satellite programs and others are vital to our national security, to the gross domestic product, to air aviation and whatnot. So I would say for now, I think that things are a bit better, a bit healthier. I mean, I think a lot of people are watching very closely the recent nomination of Barry Myers as the head of NOAA. I think there's some concerns that some people have about that nomination. He just went through his confirmation hearing last week, as a matter of fact. I don't know I think that it was voted out of committee, but I don't know if it's been confirmed by the full Senate yet. We're still waiting to see if Congressman Jim Bridenstine will be confirmed as the NASA administrator, the head of NASA. He's a congressman. You might not know the name, but if you know the big weather bill, that was another big part of 2017, by the way, that we should have mentioned. The Weather Improvement Forecasting Act was passed and signed by President Trump. It was actually going to be signed by President Obama last year, but there was a last-minute delay because of some political posturing over some water issues in the state of Georgia, frankly. But that is a huge thing that happened in 2017 that might not be on people's radar screen, but it's going to really significantly upgrade some of the responsibilities of NOAA in terms of modeling capacity, commercialization of weather data in some regards using commercial data sets. Congressman Jim Bridenstine of Oklahoma was one of the key congressmen pushing and getting that bill through.
You've had the opportunity to testify on Congress's behalf a few times about weather stuff. We see a lot of times Congress tasking NOAA or tasking the Weather Service to go out and do a study on something, what's the process with that? When they go out, they do a study, and then they have to report back. Where does it go after that?
Well, it just depends. I mean, sometimes there will be these in these bills, there will be these direct tasks that go out and find a commercial vendor that can provide global precipitable water measurements from some type of occultation method or whatever. Other times that study, you heard me mention NOAA's Office for Research. NOAA, NASA, they have research budgets, and they will send out an RFP. I mean, it'll go out and say, hey, we need this measurement, or hey, we want research on hurricane intensification project, and they'll package it in a research program of some type. And then people like me at universities or at NASA labs or NOAA research labs write proposals, and they send those proposals in and say, hey, we're smart here at the University of Georgia. We know how to do that. I can bring on these people and we can do it. So that's how it works. You send these proposals in. They are peer reviewed by experts, and then NASA or NOAA or whomever down selects who they want to do that work. And that's kind of how it gets done. Some of it gets then published in the peer reviewed research. But if it's a more directed task, for example, if National Weather Service says, hey, I need a new algorithm that can tell me if there's rain or snow based on correlation coefficient in a dual pole radar, that might be something that's more highly tasked. So there'll be some kind of report generated or deliverable that is sent to the the National Weather Service managers or whatnot. So,
okay, let's segue a little bit. Scotty, you had a question?
Yeah, Dr. Shepard, we're talking about changes and stuff. Excuse me, a little hoarse there. The National Weather Service is doing a few things with the hazard simplification. No more freeze and rain advisories, blizzard warnings, things like that. I know you're big on communication and trying to simplify the weather lingo between us to the public. So what do you think of those moves?
I think they're no-brainers, Scotty. If you're at a holiday dinner next week or later this week, ask your aunt what a PDS means. Or what a polygon means.
Right.
These are things that are sort of, they mean stuff to us, but I mean, go and look. I mean, I challenge you all or your listeners, go and Google all of the different combinations of National Weather Service watches and warnings that are out there. Just look at the ones that are there for floods alone. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so I know they're meaningful to us, but to the public, they just want to know the details. So having said that, however, Scotty, having said that, some of the changes that I think we saw, I was on something recently. So blizzard warning, there's some that argue that blizzard warning or some of the warnings that we saw for lake effect snow that have been pulled back up in those regions, some have argued that those have very specific meanings to the people in those specific regions. And so by removing them, you're actually maybe kind of challenging the message, if you will. I think there actually is something to that, but I am all for the hazard simplification. As we saw a couple of years ago here in Georgia and Atlanta with our 2-inch snow fiasco, one of the issues was, and actually I will say this, even with this most recent snow event, the one that we just had a few weeks ago, the National Weather Service had issued a winter weather advisory for much of the metropolitan Atlanta area. There were some areas that were in a winter storm watch. But what I was finding from talking to my family and friends on Facebook, they don't seem to pay attention to the winter weather advisory at all. Even though that we all know that winter weather advisory carries some snow potential, maybe a 1/2 inch to 2 inches of potential snow in Atlanta. That's enough to cause problems. But what I've noticed is that unless the National Weather Service here, at least in Georgia, says winter storm watch or warning, people kind of blow that advisory off. And so that's what we saw a little bit 2 or 3 years ago with our snow fiasco. So I think the more we see social sciences work, I know there are people like Castle Williams, one of our graduate students at Georgia, and Kim Klokow, and she just got married. She's Kim McLean now, and Gina Esco and others who are trying to understand. Look, I think we've got the technology that we need to do pretty good weather forecasts now, the models, the satellite, the radar. But we need these social scientists to tell us what colors people respond to. We need people to go out and find where county they are on a map, because we know from research that people can't find their own county on a map, but yet we use county maps to warn. So to follow up on your question, hazard simplification project going on. There's a project within NOAA called FACETS, FACETS, that people should be aware of as well. So all for it.
Shay, you had a map to pull up here talking about billion-dollar disasters in 2017. This year had a lot of them.
Yeah, and I think that map is only through October 6th, right, Shay?
Let's see here. This is actually through September.
Okay, yeah, I saw.
Excuse me, but yeah,
I saw a similar one that goes up through October. But yeah, the key point is billion-dollar weather. You know how much, guys? You guys know how much the National Weather Service's annual budget is?
Probably less than $1 billion.
It's right around $1 billion. $1 billion is all we pay for the National Weather Service each year. It works out to a few dollars or less per citizen per year. Yet count all. Now, these aren't just $1 billion events. These are just $1 billion plus events. I think the hurricane season alone is going to be a $200+ billion, just the hurricane season. So look at the value of the National Weather Service and the peanuts that we pay for a new satellite system or a new dual polar radar system versus the cost to society from these things. Now, of course, we can't throw money at it and stop these things. They're going to somewhat happen to some degree anyhow, but the more we can better predict. Let's just go there. Can I go there? Can I go there?
Let's do it.
Let's go there. The hurricane season. I mean, it's not like they were surprises, right? I mean, we were telling people for days that Hurricane Harvey was going to produce 40 to 50 inches of rainfall. Now, I know it was hard for people to fathom. It was hard for me to look at the models and see that it was talking about 50 inches of rain, but there was consensus. Hurricane Maria, Stevie Wonder could see that storm was going to hit Puerto Rico and cause damage. So when we have forecasts, we can monetize those and we can reduce lives lost and economic risk. So I'm trying to convey here to your listeners the importance of how this sort of improved forecastability tracks to save dollars. Because I'm sure you all saw that the National Hurricane Center issued a statement noting that their hurricane forecast this year are as good as they've ever been on average.
Something that stands out to me on this map is Colorado hailstorm and southeast freeze, two events I didn't even know about this year or remember at least. And those are $1 billion disasters alone in themselves. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I guarantee you they're $1 billion events because that hard freeze in the southeast, that kills crops. I mean the peach crop in Georgia is vital. I see the little peaches there on the map. The peach crop in Georgia was vital. By the way, the peach crop this year in Georgia was toast because it was so warm last winter. They need cooler temperatures. But the agricultural impacts of some of these weather events, like a hailstorm, a significant hail event, the hailstorms can destroy crops. Certainly, they beat down the crops, but they can also cause havoc if you own a car dealership too. So those are economic impacts that add up. If you're sitting there having these hailstones pounding and breaking windshields on cars on a lot, so there are these latent or hidden costs that we see in what I would say are the non-telegenic weather events that can still add up. Let's talk about hurricanes for a second. That was a huge part. I know Shay had a huge vested interest in his hurricane season. And let's just go back to kind of the forecast. Do you think the forecast for this year were good, great, or kind of average? No, I think they were good. I think Angela Fritz from Capital Weather Gang, Washington Post, nailed it on Weather Geeks. She made the point that the models were quite good with these storms in the out sort of time periods up through close to landfall. But these are global models. You take, I know the one that everyone comes to mind is Irma, and sort of Irma as it got closer to Florida. At one point there was some suggestion it was going to be an east coast part of Florida storm. Then it kind of shifted more west. But Angela made the point, we're talking only about 30 to 50 miles here. Florida's a narrow narrow state that goes north-south. So these models just don't necessarily have the skill when you're getting down at that level. They're pretty good. You go back and look at the track forecast as this thing was barreling across the Atlantic and moving towards the coast. Man, it was right on. Then we got to start shifting to the H-WRF and some of the more fine-scale models as we get close. But having said that, and I've said this a million times, even with Hurricane Irma, when it looked like it was going to be more of an East Coast Florida storm, you still had people evacuating from the eastern part of Florida, like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, over to Fort Myers.
Fort Myers, guess what, was still in the cone. It was still, so you had people evacuated from one part of the cone to another part of the cone. And I think that illustrates, kind of getting back to what Scotty says, this notion that people have their own interpretations of what that cone is showing us. I personally would have not evacuated to another part of the cone.
And that also brings up a good point. You know, we learned a lot from these storms this year, just how severe of a rain event that these hurricanes can bring to the coastline. We also saw negative storm surge in Tampa Bay. That was something that a lot of folks, I don't think they were aware that that could happen in these storms. We've seen that here in South Carolina from some of these wraparound winds. Talk a little bit about storm surge flooding, negative storm surge flooding, and our experiences with those this year.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, Shay. On that negative storm surge, those really dramatic images we were seeing in the Tampa Bay area. The first thing that came to mind to me is, you're right. I think a lot of people just were in awe of it and were fearful. I mean, were just inspired by it. But there were a lot of careless acts that I saw. You had people going out. They don't realize that water's coming back at some point. It's coming back with a vengeance. So I think, if anything I would say about that, hopefully we can use that as an opportunity to kind of teach about the sort of secondary danger associated with that. The other thing I would say about storm surge that somewhat surprised me this year, I was a little surprised at the amount of storm surge in Jacksonville with Irma. I mean, I think that ended up being a significant story this year, the record-breaking storm surge there in Jacksonville and in the downtown into the Landing, if you're familiar with the Jacksonville area, and down by I guess Everbank or Evergreen Stadium, whatever it's called, Everbank Stadium, I think is what it's called. I thought that was a significant story, considering the fact that the storm itself was, you know, sort of more to the west central part of the peninsula, but, you know, we still saw this significant surge. And of course, the inland effects. We were out, my kids were out of school for 3 days as the storm transitioned to a tropical storm and moved into Georgia and then veered off into Alabama. So I think it reminded us, that storm and the entire season reminded people to get over hurricane amnesia really quick, because we just hadn't had these kind of landfalling storms, or major landfalling storms, since '05.
It also showed the diversity in each storm, how each storm is different. There's no one that is exactly the same. And we saw, even here in Charleston, South Carolina, we had 10-foot high tide. And that's amazing, from a tropical storm force winds extending up to 500 miles away from the center of this thing, all the way up to the southeast. We had these major effects here, and tornadoes, and, it just shows you how strong these storms are as a whole, from even long distances away.
Yeah, I would say, and I agree with that completely. They're all different threats, different personalities of these storms. With Harvey, for example, I mean, I think what's most memorable, not to take any away from the devastation that we saw from a landfalling Cat 4 storm near Corpus Christi and I guess Rockport or whatnot, but I think what's most memorable about Harvey is the rain. And guess what? It was a tropical storm at that point. So it really reinforces the fact that you don't have to have this big telegenic Category 4 storm with palm trees blowing all over the place and reporters ducking from parts of the roof as they're reporting out there. Just sustained days of tropical rainfall in Harvey was essentially the second part of the story. That was the other thing that I want to kind of quickly say. Harvey, I think it was difficult for people to grasp, because people, and I get, Shay, you're in the coast. I guarantee you most people there in Charleston are sensitized to a Cat 4 storm approaching them, because they're thinking about the storm surge and the wind and the tornadoes. Those are the things we think about. And I think that was what we saw with Texas. I think it was more difficult for people to grasp the fact that there was this sort of 1-2 punch, and the second punch was going to be this lingering flood storm, because I heard people say, well, gosh, we just didn't really think it was going to be this. I heard people in Houston saying, we didn't think it was just going to be like this. But we were saying it was going to be like that. But I just think people, you know, when they haven't experienced something, they experience flooding all the time in Houston. So they probably like, I think they had the context of what they've experienced, but they haven't experienced anything like that. And so it's just hard for them to grasp.
Hey, Marshall, this is Eric from Memphis, where it seemed that several storms came to die this year as they came inland. We got high winds, and a good part of our fall rainfall this year came from the weakening end of a couple of those storms. I wanted to go back briefly, though, to one of those billion-dollar disasters, which, again, was the California water issue there in February. Seems really interesting that for the length of the drought that they had been in for a number of years, and all of the projections we've seen about how long it would take, of normal rainfall to bring this back, they came back pretty quickly here in February. And I thought, if you could comment on that, and maybe what we're seeing here, and I think you've talked about it on Forbes before as well, is that we're starting to see more of these extreme type events where things are just outside of what we typically expect from a major storm.
Yeah, I think that's the message that gets lost in the whole extreme weather and climate change discussion. People get all hyperventilating when you mention these words in tandem. Just like, oh yeah, we've had floods and droughts before, and it's like, yeah, that we understand that, but what the models and the peer-reviewed literature have always said, and what's bearing out, is that the extremes on both sides of the ledger are going to become more extreme. And so when you look at the averages, it might actually look like it averages out. But the extremes are what people feel. I mean, people don't remember the average temperature as much as they remember a heat wave or a cold snap. So it's the extremes that people remember, the droughts or the heavy rain. And so you're seeing these sort of things, these events outside the envelope of sort of average. And, we actually did a study at University of Georgia. Dr. Sergio Bernardes is one of our former PhD students, where he looked at both drought and flood in the Southeast, and he plotted them from 1800 up to the present. And what he shows, I don't know if you can see this, is that there was kind of this sort of, you get this sort of natural variability, because P.S., climate scientists know that climate changes naturally, but you get this natural variability, and then it's starting to broaden. So the peaks were getting larger, so both extremes. So that's what, when we talk about the need to understand and plan for our infrastructure, or plan for this sort of extremities, if you will, that's kind of what we're talking about. Look at the dam failure up in, I guess, in that part of Northern California because of these rains. That's an infrastructure issue, because many of the dams, many of the bridges, many of our city drainage systems, they are engineered under the assumption that it rains like it rained in 1970. And it just doesn't anymore on average for the heavier events. But you're right. We saw this one of the really interesting things about the whole California in general is you had this sort of really bad drought. Then in 2016, you had this really wet winter. And so you got some recovery. But guess what that wet winter did? It grew a lot of trees and shrubbery and plants. Then they dried out. And now we're seeing all these fires from the Diablo and Santa Ana winds. So it's just the natural water cycle, essentially a little bit on steroids.
And we saw a very similar thing with the hurricane season, seeing Maria at 185 miles an hour for an extended period of time. Things like that we're not used to seeing.
Yeah, I'm always cautious, because the hurricane discussion. I had a lot of reporters calling me up saying, "Say this is related to climate change," and I was like, "No, I can't do that. We need the attribution studies." But I can say I can certainly see some fingerprints of things in there that don't pass the smell test. In other words, the whole peer-reviewed scientific literature discussion about climate change and hurricanes has never said that there were going to be more hurricanes. I mean, there's some have tried to say that. What it has said is when they happen, they're going to have a tendency to be stronger or more intense or linger at higher intensities longer. That's kind of what we saw this year. But the Kerry Emanuel just came out with a study sort of suggesting that some of the hurricane activity does have some DNA to climate change. But I will say there are a couple of things, you can quote me right here on Carolina Weather Group tonight. There are a couple of things that I do believe where we do see somewhat conclusively a climate change fingerprint. One is just the fact that we know sea level is rising. I mean, anyone that disputes that or tweets me and disputes that, I'm just going to completely ignore that, because that's just demagogue. That's just ridiculous. Sea level's rising, so these storms are pushing more water in the storm surge when they happen. No, that's not deniable in my opinion. Secondly, look at Hurricane Ophelia this year. Hurricane Ophelia, there's a peer-reviewed study in the literature a couple of years ago that said that we're going to see more European falling hurricanes because the ocean waters in the Atlantic extending eastward and northward are warmer. The data shows that. I'm not making that up to get a grant. I mean, that's just what the data shows. And so I think, oh, thank you, right on time there. So, I see a little cold pocket there right now, but what we see here, and one of the things that we can clearly see, and we can certainly chat about that as well in this image that I don't know if Shay put that up, who put that up, but we can clearly see the very distinct La Nina pattern there in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, as well as in terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies as well. But look at the Atlantic and then the Eastern Northern Pacific, still fairly warm. And I mean, look over there to the Eastern Pacific near Europe, warm water. So Ophelia and other storms are going to really eventually and continually be feeding off that generation of warm water. I mean, that 90+% of the warming that's happening in our system is not in the atmosphere, folks. It's in the ocean. So that heat eventually comes back to the atmosphere.
We kind of got into the end of the season. We talked about hurricanes for a minute. And to sum up, I guess, the Atlantic hurricane season in a few words, what stands out as the biggest story of the Atlantic hurricane season?
I think the biggest story of the hurricane season is that, we had one. we had an active season where we had landfall. And we've certainly had seasons even in recent years where we've had hurricanes. Just the pattern that was setting up, these things were making landfall this year. But I think the storyline is the extremity of the storms that we had. We had, I think, at one point, 10 hurricanes in a row. That in itself is a storyline right there. But then when you package that with the fact that you had 3 history-making, humanitarian crisis-generating storms, I think that's the headline, and that's what I'll remember.
So, let's kind of, I guess, segue to the end of the season. Anything that stands out in the fall or winter months as we kind of wrap up our conclusion of 2017?
I think the big story still right now is the fires out in California, the Santa Anas. I mean, we get Santa Anas. I mean, that happens. I mean, that's just a part of the natural ecosystem and meteorological and climatological cycle. So, I mean, that's just the story that has kind of bookended the year, if you will. I think we're still on record to be probably the 3rd warmest year on record as we end 2017. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And of course, we're sort of in the heart or the peak of the La Nina right now as well. So, I think 2017 gave us the weather variability that we always expect. It gave us the short-term variability in climate that we certainly see, La Nina coming into La Nina, and then it gave us plenty of fodder to have discussions about the broader changes in climate as well. So, it's just a conversation that we better get used to having. I think we've got to be careful not to overhype things. We have to be careful to not sort of say everything is caused by climate change. We have to be careful not to say nothing's caused by climate change. I think the extremes on both sides sound a little ridiculous, but for the weather geek or the weather buff in all of us, I mean, 2017 was a very interesting to follow. For the technology part of us, I think you hit on this, Ricky. Just the JPSS GOES, the continued sort of use of dual polarization radar and the evolution of social sciences within our field. I think that's where we're going. If you were to ask me to look into my crystal ball for 2018 and beyond, I would say that the things that are most on my radar are continued refinement of transitioning some of this social science knowledge into operation, continued consistency in messaging, whether it be from the broadcasters like yourself and stations to stations that I might appear on every now and then. So I think that's important, and continued funding of our satellite program and our modeling. I think this Weather Improvement Act will continue to do that as well. And hopefully, I know it won't happen, but hopefully we can stop people from posting 10 and 20-day snowfall forecast on Twitter.
Yeah, I was
going to. Bad time to ask you about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Dr. Shepard. The state of social meteorology in 2017, getting better, getting worse, or just about the same?
I mean, Jared, it is what it is to some degree. I think that, it's an interesting, I think about this often. I think social media is a net positive for what we do. if as long as those of us that are responsible about it can continue to point out the ridiculousness and foolishness that's out there, I think that's important to do. And I think I think people are starting to develop a sixth sense for the foolishness out there. Yeah, it's still out there, but the more and more we call it out, I think the better we'll be. So I think, do you guys do Snapchat by chance?
Shay does. We're trying
No. Hold on. I know. I'm so slow to get to it. I swear I'm going to get to it because, not only do we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter. What else do you want to throw in the pile of a day's work? Snapcasting it's a growing thing, right? Like, I know we kind of make fun of it, but it has a great algorithm for getting the entire audience all at one time.
That was my point, Shay, because I don't use it either. So, but I think it is one of the it's got these sort of the algorithm that you mentioned. It also has this sort of snap map feature that people can identify sort of in real time where there's a power outage or flooding. So it has some potential, more so than, of course, Facebook, which many of us have railed on as being virtually useless for conveying real-time weather information. I think Twitter's much better than Facebook at that type of thing. But I think Snapchat, from what I can tell, at least I don't really use it, seems to be even better for real-time. But the problem is, unless you're under 30, you're not using it. I don't know. I'm generalizing some. I know that's what most of the students are using at University of Georgia. I know that's what my 14-year-old daughter is using, and they need to get weather information too. So, how are we getting? I don't know if that's kind of a frontier for weather information, because from a social meteorology standpoint, are people Snapchatting 10 days snowfall maps? I don't know.
Well, I will say that during Irma in Charleston, SnapMap was awesome because I was able to find a lot of flooding video. I put a note in it about that in the Weather Service chat. They called me up and I kind of walked them through a few things. They can't not use Snapchat operational in the National Weather Service, but still, any intel that's out there is absolutely useful. So it's a great point.
I know, and that's why I brought it up, because I want, even though I'm still, I actually do have a Snapchat account or whatever you call it, but I just haven't ventured into it yet. But I do recognize and acknowledge that it probably is another useful frontier for us to be on. But I would say, to just wrap up to answer your question, I think is we have to be each other's keeper, if you will, in social media on sort of eradicating the foolishness.
And Dr. Shepard, I know we're closing in on 9 o'clock, but there's one thing that, not really weather-wise, but it is kind of weather-wise. It had the weather community all in a buzz, and actually the whole country, was the great eclipse that occurred. And that was a cool moment. I think everyone actually could focus on something neat happening. And just talk a little bit about that and how that really helped us. Helped out. It was cool to see the satellite images and the temperature differences and stuff like that.
Yeah, you have these sort of teachable moments in science sometimes, and certainly the eclipse was that. We got all into it at the University of Georgia. We opened up Sanford Stadium. We had UGA eclipse glasses. We had 25,000 people in Sanford Stadium, not watching a football game. We'd have more people than that, obviously, in a game anyhow. But we had 25,000 people sitting there in 90-plus degree temperatures, listening to us talk about the science of eclipse and listening to music, eclipse-themed music, and getting free T-shirts that were being thrown into the audience. So we turned a natural moment into a teaching moment, and I think people all across the nation did that. And we weren't even in Athens, Georgia. We weren't even at totality. We were only at 99.1%. I imagine in some parts of the Carolinas, Charleston, I know, was definitely in the totality. I heard there were some clouds in some parts of Charleston, but we certainly saw a really cool event at 99.1%. And if you were fortunate enough to be in totality, it was super awesome. So what I would say about that, it was a teachable moment. It was awesome. And it shows that science actually can predict things.
That's right.
Except for that one lady who wanted to move the eclipse because her kids had to go back to school that day.
I saw that getting around. That was funny.
Oh, well, Dr. Shepard, I know it's almost 9 o'clock. I know you have to get out. But before you do that, what should turn into the Weather Geeks, something that we all watch and the whole weather community watches? What can we expect in 2018 from you guys? Any cool things coming up?
Oh yeah, we do. I can't say about some of them right now, but Weather Geeks is entering its. We've done 132 shows, guys. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Going into our 4th full year. This, by the way, this Sunday's episode is a repeat, but if you didn't see it, it is must-watch TV. A guy named Lee Orr, a professor who uses these high-resolution simulations of supercells and tornadoes. The visuals in that episode are unbelievable, so definitely try to catch that if you missed that. That's this Sunday. But yeah, Weather Geeks is we're not gonna be taping at AMS this year. We're AMS meeting. Hopefully, some of you will get the chance to holler at some of you at the AMS meeting. It's in Austin this year, 2nd week of January. I'll be there, and we have taped some shows at the AMS in the past. We're not going to do that this year, but we're thinking about possibly doing some tapings at maybe the AGU next year. I mean, that's not a definite yet, so I didn't break any news, but we're having some discussions about that type of thing. Got some pretty exciting guests on. I can't really mention who some of them are because we like to kind of use some teases. I was pretty geeked out a couple of weeks ago because we had Thomas Dolby on. If you guys remember the song "She Blinded Me with Science," he's an '80s song, a little bit before some of y'all's time. But I mean, I've always been a fan of Thomas Dolby, so that was one of the tip of the top geek moments for me on the show. But yeah, we're still going strong. Nothing's changed about the show. I mean, we want to do a show that is interesting to the weather geeks, but what we know is not just weather geeks are watching it. I get people all the time that just are sort of garden variety Joe and Jane public that say they enjoy the show. So we think we tapped into something that people enjoy, and it's just a part of a broader sort of community, just like you guys, Carolina Weather Group, and shout out to our folks at friends at Weather Brains. We're all trying to do the same thing, just nurture our love for weather and educate people and get people talking.
Marshall, I hope one of the things that you can't talk about that you're going to break sometime is that it will be a 1-hour show. We're really looking forward to that.
You know, tweet. Everybody should tweet Mike Chester at Mike Chesterfield, executive producer, and say they want that. And you know, I think, obviously, I think we know people want it. It's unfortunately not as. There are a couple of things that are sort of outside of my pay grade, and I don't work in the Weather Channel. That's one thing I have to remind people. I'm actually just a consultant to them. You know, my day job is UGA, but there are some things that are just sort of outside of the pay grades in terms of we get asked about 1 hour a lot, and we get asked about putting the shows online, which we started out doing. But from what I understand from the executive producer, there's something about the distribution deal with the cable networks and other things. They don't like that. So they want, you guys can, TV is a business, so I can understand that. But we are there. I will say this. I know that Mike Chesterfield is working on both of those. So stay tuned.
Yeah, you've had some great guests this year. Hats off to getting Mark Willis from Surfline on. I think we need more wave action.
Yeah, Mark was a great guest too, by the way. I really enjoyed that show. Yeah, and by the way, if you guys or any of the listeners or viewers have any ideas for Weather Geek shows, tweet us, shoot us emails. There have been several shows that have aired that came from viewer ideas.
Dr. Shepard, absolute last question, then we'll let you run. How much are our Bulldogs going to win by? Any game predictions?
I'm not going to make any predictions. I will say that we're favored right now. I'm pretty bummed out. I'm pretty sure we're going to win the game, but I'm bummed out because if we win it and come back to Atlanta to the national championship game, I'm going to be in Austin at the AMS. Oh.
Actually, Dr. Shepard, we're not going to let you run yet because we want the full rundown on how James was. He a good student? Did he listen? I mean,
James is absolutely amazing student. I think James. I had you in my intro to weather and climate class. God, how many years ago was that?
It feels like a long time ago. But
he was very good. I know for a fact he got an A. So,
so how much did he pay you to say that?
He didn't pay me anything. I'm not saying this. I think you guys know me well enough to know that I'm pretty candid. I wouldn't say this just because he's sitting there, but he was. I think that was. I don't remember how large that class was, James, but was it one of the 80 seaters or one of the?
I was gonna say it's large enough that I am always impressed with how well you knew everyone's name.
Right. But I definitely knew most people's names, but I definitely, there's certain students that stand out to me, and James was one of those, and I knew he'd end up still talking weather later in his life. So,
and here we are.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Shepard, we appreciate you taking some time out and joining us.
Absolutely, guys.
we love our annual visit with you, and hopefully we can go ahead and book you for.
Let's go ahead and book it and make it an annual thing. We can do that.
We can do it. Well, we hope you and your family have a great Christmas. How can our followers follow you throughout the year?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Shepherd 2013. And Shepherd is spelled with PH in there because a lot of people spell Shepherd all kinds of ways. At Dr. Shepherd 2013. I've got a public website out there. I mean, I'm at Facebook page as well that people can follow me on Facebook as well. I'm on Instagram, but I've got that shut down. That's mostly it's more personal stuff. And also definitely be sure to follow Weather Geeks at WX Geeks TWC. Follow that, tweet us out there if you got some show ideas. And thanks as always. Keep doing what you guys are doing. And we'll see you guys next holiday season.
Sounds good. And before when we see you next year, we're going to expect to see your Snapcast. You and Shay can kind of coordinate that.
We'll see if that happens. Next year, it'll probably be something else anyway, right?
That's true. The way it goes, that's exactly true. Dr. Shepherd, thanks so much.
All right, guys.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you guys. Happy Hanukkah and all that too. Yeah, and Happy Kwanzaa, all that. See you guys. Bye.
See ya. All right. Well, always good to have Dr. Shepherd with us here at the Carolina Weather Group. So another great show and some awesome information from him. Oh, nobody's going to talk. Nobody's going to follow me up with that.
Hey, we got tweeted. Well, it's great. Or if you want to do something.
Yes, we'll get tweet of the week going. So is anybody ready?
No, not at all. I'm also looking forward to what Shay's got prepared. I think he did some research for us on some other topics. Is that what we're looking at here, Shay?
We are looking at one of the far east sectors of GO-16 imagery, which is fantastic, capturing imaging off of the Horn of Africa. So I'm sorry, this is Western Africa, and this is where the Saharan air layer originates from. So you have low-level jetting that blows sand across the deserts, and it lifts dust up into the atmosphere, up to the mid-levels, and this is what is known as the Saharan air layer. And I just found out today that GO-16 will actually go this far east to capture this very well. Up until now, we've only been seeing NASA images of this, MODIS imaging occasionally from time to time. This is going to be real-time 1 minute to 5 or 3 or 5 minute imagery. And it'll give us a better idea of what's going on in this part of the area. For those of you who don't know, sometimes the Saharan air layer can have an effect on what kind of tropical events come off of the coast of Africa across the Atlantic along the equatorial monsoonal trough in the Atlantic. So this will be extremely helpful. You can see the Cape Verde Islands just here to the north, and then here is the western coast of Africa. So you can see the dust coming off the dust plume. It's going to be extremely helpful for next year. Looking forward to more from Goes East. And, we just keep finding more and more stuff. Now that it's operational, we'll find more as it goes along.
All right, Shay, good stuff. Let's go to James. I think he's got his pulled up.
Yeah, if I can follow, keeping on the topic of satellites here, we did a whole show about JPSS-1. It launched. It's up. Some of the first imagery here from one of those instruments on board showing us that smoke in California that we talked about briefly during our show today. You can see it there, some beautiful high-resolution imagery. And I know we touched upon it early on the show, but we are really coming into an amazing age of just outstanding satellite imagery here, and really looking forward to that, guys, as we head into 2018.
All right, James, thanks for that. We'll go to Jared because I see he has his pulled up.
Yeah, this is from Philippe Pepin. I hope I got that right. New PhD from UAlbany, and he does these awesome maps. I just, I'm a big fan of these guys who really do a good job analyzing maps. The Cranky Weather Guy, and Philippe came on my radar this year during the hurricane season, and so he's got a really cool gift showing these teleconnections and vorticity streamers too. That's another thing that he's very interested in. PV streamers that he has done research on, and so you can kind of see just how. Basically, what he's trying to do here is show us how the cool snap for Christmas and beyond is going to evolve all the way from the other side of the Pacific. So pretty cool stuff. Way smarter guy than I am. Try to surround myself with those kinds of people. So definitely give him a follow. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool, Jerry, because it's showing the omega blocks. It's showing Rossby waving and the lee side or the lee end of PV streamers. And I think Levi Cowan of Tropical Tidbits has really talked a lot about those during the hurricane in the Atlantic. So really exciting stuff from this gentleman right here. He's really, really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
If you guys want to, we can mess up Ricky right now. I think he's doing a promo. If we all want to yell Ricky's name. All right, Peter, do you have your tweet of the week up?
I do, and just want to give a quick shout out to Cinnabon. You didn't see it at the beginning of the show because we skipped the introductions, but we did have Cinnabon here tonight because it is our last show of 2017. So why not celebrate with a great big pecan Cinnabon? So we'll be waiting for.
Does anyone else think that Peter's getting a little bit of a Cinnamon kickback here someplace?
I mean, he must. He's not sharing it with us.
I know. Where is it? You showed us the Cinnabon earlier. Where is it?
It's currently in my stomach.
Ah.
If you saw me in the little screen at the bottom there, I was chowing down the whole show.
What a blow to the ad that you just you had it and then you just lost it.
Well, you can have the bag if you want. I can send you that. Anyway, all right, let's get to this tweet. So if you were with us last week, it was like nonstop snowing here for 3 days last week. But now all the snow is gone just that fast. So we didn't have that much anyway. But as you can see on the maps here, we did have about 2 inches or so all over Philly and the surrounding areas. But now it's all gone. The entire Atlantic and even you guys down in the Carolinas is all gone too. So yeah, it's been kind of warm around here, 40s and 50s the last couple of days, but looks like we're going to be getting into that colder weather again for Christmas and beyond. So hopefully we won't get any big snow here, but we'll see.
Are you saying we have a chance?
Yeah, there is a chance.
All right, I'll pull up mine.
Out before we know it.
I'll pull up mine. Normally we don't do political stuff here, and I'm not really doing it, but I wanted to have a fun tweet of the week. So as you guys know, the big news story, Alabama had a Senate election last week. And so in Shelby County, which is Birmingham, there's several write-ins. And I want to say our good buddy James Spann received 3 write-in votes for a Senate for a senator's position in Alabama. So this is my tweet of the week this week from Christopher Sine, showing that our buddy James Spann, meteorologist at ABC 3340, got 3 votes for the Senate race. So good job, James.
I think he'd be a good senator.
I think he would. Ricky,
respect the electoral polygon.
I don't know if Ricky. Oh yeah, Ricky's there. So Ricky, do you have a tweet of the week?
No.
No. All right. He's working tonight. Ricky's working tonight.
I've got Eric up on.
I've got one.
Eric's got one. So let's go to Eric.
All right. I saw this one come by this week, and it got retweeted quite a bit too amongst people that I follow. And you know, we're talking about the communication a little earlier, and I thought this was pretty interesting, showing what people feel like the actual probability of an event is based on the wording that is used. And we're always trying to get those, those words in there that will ring true with people. So this is not a sunset picture of the Alps, though it looks kind of like that. But it does show some pretty interesting data. And you'll see right down here around probably not, little chance, almost no chance. That's our snow chance for Christmas right down there, folks. Okay? So we're residing right down in that area right now. Not all the way down, but almost.
But I saw on Facebook where.
But Eric, how do you feel about that?
How do I feel about that? Well, considering we've got another chance late next week, maybe I feel a little bit better about it. Maybe for New Year's, we'll see.
That's what I'm saying, Eric. Next week looks interesting. That is a statement that I think we can all agree on.
Too bad we can't talk about it next Wednesday night.
That's right. Yeah, we're gonna be off. Well,
recap it.
That's our show, everybody. That's the Carolina Weather Group for 2017. It's hard to believe we've completed another year. What do you guys think as we wrap up? I know a lot of people want to jump off, but kind of comment. What has this year been like for the Carolina Weather Group? How do you think it's went? I mean, we've had a lot of stuff to cover. Something to fill in my room.
Things are literally falling apart.
The things are falling apart.
I think you've had a couple of great
for
panels.
5 minutes, and then I come back, and this show has gone to the dogs.
Wait,
Well,
I'm sorry,
we
Ricky.
didn't have our
Where did
leader.
it go? Where did it go, Ricky?
to the dogs.
He's right here.
And recap.
No, Scotty, just to sum it up, though, I mean, you mentioned what has this year been for us. I mean, wow, 200 shows that we got by. It's hard to believe our little weekly weather nerd out has transform into that. We've welcomed some new panel members. Eric's joined us. Jared joined us. James has kind of come and go from time to time. James, were you on it again this year? I forget when you joined us.
I think this was my first full year. Yeah.
I think it was your first full year too.
Yeah, because we had you and Kozer on about around this time last year, and that's when we started.
That was 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Then you've been here with 2 years. Then.
I think so. We got these sexy new graphics thanks to Jared. Take a look. Aren't they pretty?
Yeah.
And we continue to love Cinnabon.
That's right.
And we have occasional Starbucks with PDQ for dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't forget Helicity Designs.
Oh, yeah.
Made our shirts for us. In fact, let me see if I can find one. And
which is back now. I got a shirt from them the other day.
Yep. All right. I don't know if it's backwards when I put it up in front of the camera, but I do have this.
Yep. Good.
I like it.
So the old frontalis shirt, where fronts come to die in the Southeast. So absolutely, we got to mention Helicity Designs. But Scotty, I have to say, I think we've taken it to new levels this year. Honestly, we've had some really good guests. We always have good guests. Every one of them that comes on. We had Doug Marcy from NOAA come on to talk about sea level rise, a very important topic. That was a really good one. We had Jim Cantori join us for the first time. We had a lot of first time guests. I think we've had with all the weather events, and we had John Jensenius with NOAA Lightning. He's the lightning expert. We've had a lot of top experts in their fields on with us this year, which is fantastic. And
I agree.
I've learned a lot. I have learned an absolute amazing amount of information from these gentlemen this year.
I agree.
And ladies.
I was looking at our list. I mean, Patrick Marsh, head of SPC, was on our show. So that was really cool. I think Ricky had to drop because he is doing some promos. But, we always have Levi on every year. Victor has been on the show, Victor Genesini. We talked about him. We had Ryan Hickman from Allison House, always giving us the updates with what's going on there. We got to talk to the director of the JPSS satellite launch.
Mm-hmm.
That was really cool too, with Dr. Goldberg. So, it's been a great year, and we've already got guests scheduled for next year. So, it's been pretty cool.
And what about our frequent guests, the folks who we consistently see on Facebook Live and on YouTube, and I'm sure all the folks who download us on Google Play and iTunes? That's incredible. I love everyone who comes in and tunes in, but I really, really do appreciate those names that are in the chat each and every week.
I agree.
We just did one, the meteor shower, the Geminids, and we posted that live. What was it, Friday night? I can't remember.
That was epic. Thank you, NASA. Whoever stuck that camera up in the sky.
With rock and roll music, and we had it on all night long, and we had over 25,000 views on that overnight. And people were chiming in all the way from here to Hawaii. It was amazing.
It is really cool. So we'll wrap it up. I know you guys are probably tired of us yapping, but I do want to say I appreciate Eric coming on this year. Jared, I appreciate you coming on and adding to the show. Ashley Morris, who her computer was doing an update, so she wasn't able to join us tonight. So Ashley, a new panelist with us this year. And then Shay and James and Ricky and myself and Peter. We've been here for a while, so we just really appreciate everyone who joins in with us every Wednesday night, and we look forward to doing this thing next year, right, gentlemen?
And that is absolutely right, Scotty.
Yep. Are you cutting me out?
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on here. It's I've learned a lot in the last few months. I appreciate that, and I encourage everybody to also go check out Stormwatch Plus for your iOS device as well. Coming soon to an Android near you. How about that?
All right. News? Is that my Christmas present?
We're working on it.
What's the promotional keyword, Eric? Is it Carolina?
Carolina. Yep.
Okay.
Stormwatchplus.com/Carolina. What is it? I think
it's on our
Carolina.
page, if that helps. CarolinaWeatherGroup.com. Check out our app.
There you go.
Or Eric's app that we're promoting. That one.
Jared you've brought a lot. We thank you for the graphics. I know you and James have really worked hard behind the scenes, hours of getting that. So really cool stuff.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. I've got to dig back into my media background a little bit and have some fun with that, fuse that with the programming side. I think one big thing that stood out this year when we were dealing with Nate and we had those tornadoes for 3 hours, and I just happened to be on for 3 hours, and James was my relief, and then all the tornadoes went away. But it's been a fantastic few months with you guys, and boy, it's blown my mind. That's for sure. So looking forward to getting a full year in, and just to continue to grow and learn. And it's still it's amazing to be with you guys every Wednesday night. It's a lot of fun.
It is. We have fun. It's hard to believe we do this. I know we may take off 1 or 2 Wednesday nights a year, but you guys are we're all like family. We all get to come together on Wednesday nights. So cool stuff. So James, you're heading up to New York.
That's right. I was just going to say we're off next week, Scotty, but folks, we are here. We are keeping an eye on those winter forecasts you may or may not be hearing about. So if we need to come out of the woodwork, come off from our vacation to debunk anything or to keep you informed of a situation that is developing, we will be here.
We will, and James will be ready with his power outages.
That's right. County by county.
From west to east. How it's going to roll, baby.
Oh, gosh. Well, everyone, we hope you guys have a happy holidays. Stay safe out there. Enjoy your time with friends and family. Like James said, we won't see you next week, but we'll see you January 3rd for a new year of Carolina Weather Group. So until then, happy holidays, stay safe, and we'll see you next year.
Yep. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, November 29th, 2017 edition. We are welcome to have Jim Cantori from the Weather Channel on with us tonight. Happy to have Jim with us. We're going to be recapping the 2017 tropical Atlantic season. It's been a busy one, and Jim's been out in most of them. So we're happy to have Jim tonight. Kind of talk about his experiences through all the hurricanes and tropical storms, and kind of ask him what his thoughts are on this season. But before we get to Jim, let's go over a few of the housekeeping rules. We are a live broadcast, so if you do want to interact with us tonight, there's many ways you can do that. We are live streaming right now on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and Periscope. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section or the comment bars, and we'll monitor those throughout the event. And if you want to tweet us at Carolina WX Group and submit your questions that way, we will get those answered as well. And if you're listening on our podcast, maybe a few days from now, we'll let Jim drop his social media information towards the end of the show, and that way you can reach out to him. So we are going to skip the roundtable discussion. I will say it's pretty cool to see James and Peter in the same Starbucks. We'll maybe get that story at the end of the show. But to get all our time with Jim, I'm going to toss it over to Ricky, and Ricky's going to conduct our interview. And again, if you have any questions, we will be monitoring throughout the show and make sure to get those asked. So, Ricky, off to you, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much, Scotty. Jim, I first have to apologize for blowing up your social media accounts for all the members on our board here, because I'm pretty sure we probably sent you probably 30 notifications or so about tonight's show. But that just shows you how excited we all are to have you join us.
It's a privilege. It's always great to talk to other Mets. That's one of the greatest things about working at the Weather Channel, actually, is to have so many meteorologists around. So, you guys are part of the family here. So looking forward to it, man.
So tonight we really want to talk about hurricanes. And, at the Weather Channel, I think probably you're best known for your hurricane coverage. 2017 was really a remarkable year overall. Give us some of your just thoughts on the season in general.
Well, I mean, first of all, just kind of the irony of how the whole thing started for me, because here I am out covering this beautiful time for America with the eclipse, right? Where we had something go from the West Coast to the East Coast. And, obviously, what can you say bad about the eclipse? It came at a time we really needed it. We had a lot of political bashing going on. And here's this wonderful thing as the eclipse. And I'm literally out covering that. And I'm going to say maybe an hour and a half after that coverage concluded, the phone's ringing. Jim, how quick can you get to Texas? I'm like, I have nothing to cover a hurricane with right now. I'm going to have to go home first, repack, and go out. And from that point on, it was, pretty much out the door for 2 months straight. And as you guys know, and as everybody knows, it was just a horrible season. Our first Cat 4 since 2005, our first major since 2005, and then 3 Cat 4 landfalls. I've never seen anything like it, especially for the Caribbean. The kind of destruction and certainly the heartache for millions and millions of people. So to go from that, the eclipse, this wonderful moment, to just hell for 3 months, that just sticks with me. That just sticks with me.
I remember when the eclipse was coming up, there were actually model predictions that a hurricane may have been in the path totality at one time.
Yes, I remember tweeting about that. Yep.
Crazy to think about, this year, and how many different science aspects have come up. But as you mentioned, this really was the first majorly active U.S. season for landfalls in so many years. Talk about how the differences in the last time we really had so many U.S. landfalls. What would say 2005 maybe?
Yeah, 2005. We had 29 and 28, whatever it was. Named storms. They went right over through the new year into 2006. It was ridiculous, but like 2005, warm water. Very little shear, especially in the MDR, in the main development region, and we saw 3 storms essentially fulfill their maximum potential, and then to not have anything to knock them down. They stayed strong for days and days and days. Especially Irma. Irma set the record for staying at Cat 5 strength the longest number of hours. So it was just Katie bar the door, and unfortunately the U.S. And the Caribbean were big targets.
So I want to kind of take the 3 major storms and break them down in terms of your thoughts on them, your coverage and stuff like that. Let's start with Harvey, since you mentioned that one, and you mentioned the quick turnaround. Harvey, to me, was a storm in terms of coverage that was almost unlike any we've seen before in terms of how we had to deal with a multi-day storm. It wasn't just the storm coming and going in 24 hours. It was so much that we had to deal with day after day after day. What type of toll does that take on you guys out in the field covering it?
Well, it's so different this time because, back in 2005, we were at the mercy of the satellite truck. If you couldn't put the dish up, you weren't broadcasting. It was that simple. Now with live view and the speed of the internet, you've got a full HD audio and visual signal out there. And so, especially with Irma is a great example for us. You literally saw us take Irma's eye wall through Florida, okay, from Bettis and Naples to me in Fort Myers. We had Seidel and Miami getting flooded. So, I mean, we could stay up. And it's certainly more taxing on us because it's not like here we do a shot, then we throw it back to the studio. Now we're essentially anchoring from the field throughout the entire storm. So, that's certainly been the big change over that 12-year period. Plus, when you go back and look at the track forecasts and the accuracy of the track forecasts, and the fact that the models nailed those ridiculous precipitation forecasts for the Houston metro area. I mean, as bad as it was, we have to kind of tip our hats a little bit. I mean, this was some really good stuff from the computer models, and they allowed us to obviously not take the storms away, but give people probably some of the best preparation that we could.
It almost reminds me of Sandy. I mean, think about when Sandy was projected to make that quick left turn. It was almost the point where we didn't believe the models for a while because they were so astronomically crazy.
Yeah, I mean, October is a kind of a crazy month for storms because you can get so many undulations as you start getting the mid-latitude jet streams dropping farther south. So, yeah, you're absolutely right to kind of agree and buy into that left turn. The problem with Sandy, and thank goodness we didn't get into that this year, was the minutia of, okay, is this going to be fully tropical or not when it makes landfall? It doesn't matter. Okay, we focused on impacts all along, regardless of what it was become or how it was transforming. And a good example of that storm this year, I think, was Ophelia. Ophelia stayed Cat 3 as far east as we've ever seen anything. It stayed a hurricane as far east as we've seen anything, and then morphed into this huge storm for Ireland, and created just. Honestly, I wanted to go cover that. I really wanted to go cover that storm over in Ireland, just to experience something that went extra topical, but yet still had hurricane force wind gusts, still had 20 to 30 foot seas crashing onto the Ireland coast. I mean, just unthinkable, just unthinkable.
You mentioned some of the new NHC stuff that we have this year, being able to issue warnings and watches, even if it's not tropical. One of the other things that's come up a lot this year is the potential tropical cyclone product. How has that been something for you guys to communicate? You like it? Do you not like it?
I mean, look, just call it a depression and issue the advisories. I think it got confusing. I had a lot of people tweet me and say, Jim, are we calling them cyclones now? Okay, or why are they cyclones versus depressions or storms? I think that was a little bit that whole potential tropical cyclone, just that verbiage right there, I think created a little bit of confusion. I totally get it. I know why you wanted to put that out there, and I think it certainly succeeded in that way. But as defined, a tropical depression is an area of low pressure, and I don't think they use that annotation enough. I think you should be able to put up warnings even if something's a tropical depression, especially if you feel comfortable in the guidance that suggests it's going to explode or even develop further.
And that was
that's my thing.
And with Harvey, that was something we did see. It really rapidly intensified. How much are you able to look at images and content out in the field when you're anchoring?
It's especially because I'm anchoring from the field now I have to look at. I have to look at what's going on. I mean, sometimes I'll get some Twitter stuff. A lot of my good buddy Rob Maceda from Skywarn Spotters in New England, he would always text me some of the stuff that was going on from some of the different spotter groups, and real-time information from a guy I totally trust right there in the palm of my hand. So especially for Nate, as I'm getting breaking wind gusts and things like that, rainstorm amounts, power outages, things like that, I've got it right there in the palm of my hand. So I almost need that kind of real-time information that certainly we can get from Storm Spotter Group. That was huge.
And so, let's segue a little bit from Harvey to Irma. Irma was a really interesting storm to me because it also took a kind of a hook turn. But you guys, you had to kind of relocate your live shots, didn't you, as Irma was coming up because it went a little further west than we anticipated?
Yeah, it kind of, thank goodness, first of all, it flirted with Cuba. People don't realize this, but if it didn't spend time flirting with Cuba, I think even up here in Atlanta, we would have had a horrible situation on our hands. The other thing, too, is we're going from Miami over to Fort Myers. When they asked us to relocate, we're already into tropical storm force winds. So there's not time to sit around and locate the right position to broadcast from. And, my hugest appreciation to the Lee County Sheriff's Office, because I called, I had a friend of mine in Miami call them and say, I want a bulletproof vest when I go out there because I am around all these trees. I'm going to get impaled. That's the last thing I want, because we're already getting a bad rap for being out there in the first place. So, all right, look, if I'm going to be out there, I got to at least take the precautions that I need to say, yeah, I'm going to be out there. I'm going to show you what the storm's doing, what it's going through, but I'm going to take precautions to hopefully reduce my chances of getting impaled. So hence the helmet and the body armor.
You become a kind of
it's tough sometimes, man. Last minute, you don't have that luxury of getting the type of logistics that you want for a live shot. Because we were on live that morning in Miami, and then we moved, as the storm was coming in, and then all of a sudden pretty much arrived on scene, had to set up shop. And I'm looking around, I got tile, roof shingles. I've got trees all around me. Some of them are non-natives. I'm like, this with 145, remember, it was still 145 miles an hour. This could not end well. Especially, for a bald guy. So I need to get something on my head, something on my body, just in case.
Yeah, I saw.
The good news is it certainly was a lot less. I mean, I think we gusted to 100, not 145 miles an hour, but it was certainly a lot less than what we were planning for. But that's good. We like that.
I saw on social media you had the opportunity to go down to Key West recently and kind of check in with Jim Eds and a few other people down there and see some of the damage. What was that like?
Yeah, we just went down a couple of weeks ago to record the throws, the ins and outs for our show that we're airing on December 3rd called Hurricanes 2017, Cruel and Unusual. That'll be 10 p.m. on the Weather Channel, by the way. First of all, Big Pine Key is still absolute wreck. There's rubble everywhere. I mean, you could tell there was probably a 4 to 6 foot storm surge. They haven't come out with the numbers yet, but there are, people that, have built their dream homes down there or located down there in Florida are just doing as much cleanup as they can. Some of the houses are totaled. The same thing we find on the central coast of Texas, which I know we moved on to Irma, but I don't want to skip this fact. Like Katrina, the true hurricane part of this, and I'm not saying that Harvey's flood was not part of the hurricane, but the New Orleans flood was a man-made disaster, and it happened in the metro area. So a lot of the attention went certainly up to Houston, as it should have. But you almost forgot a little bit what happened down in Port Aransas and Rockport. I mean, they had an oncoming, intensifying Category 4 hurricane. And I'm going to tell you this, standing in Corpus Christi, just outside the eye wall in Harvey, I'm telling you, it was worse than being in Fort Myers with Irma, whether that be due to frictional effects from the land or whatnot. I think the eye wall in Harvey, outside of it, where I was worse than what I dealt with in Irma. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you it was, because it was. I stood in it, in both of them.
Do you think, Jim, and I noted this during Arthur, when I was on the coast, when Arthur was making landfall in North Carolina, intensifying storms at landfall just seems so much
Worst
more
case
intense.
Scenario. Yep. Because remember, I mean, just because now all of a sudden they get on shore, if they're still in that intensifying mode with the frictional effects, that doesn't mean they're just going to stop all of a sudden. And the fact that Harvey just literally came to a crawl means, so now you got to take this Cat 4 hurricane down. So it's a wind machine. Plus it's starting to produce already these prolific rainfall amounts in Houston. So, next day we went down, we showed you Rockport and Port Aransas with live coverage. And then they're like, look at next day, get up to Houston. So literally we got into Houston and there is pandemonium go. There's chaos everywhere. There's helicopters picking people off roofs, boats coming up to exits that are now flooded. You can't get off ramps. You've got Army National Guard literally taking dozens and dozens of people of whatever they can grab. People are upset. They're visibly shaken. They're soaked to the bone. They've been either wading through water or being poured rain on. It was just one of those situations where almost like after a tornado that it's just breaking. It's still breaking. And that went on for days because of the Houston flood and the water getting higher and higher. And Harvey was remarkable. And no question, Harvey, Irma, and Maria will be retired names. No question in my mind.
And Jim, you're talking about that. Not only you, but other Weather Channel crew members in the Houston area. You had to deal with the flash flooding, but also I remember, I think it was Sunday and Monday, there were several tornado warnings being issued for the Houston area. You got people being rescued from flooding, and then you got to take cover from tornadoes. How did you guys, how was that covering that aspect, not only the flash flooding, but the potential for tornadoes?
I mean, when Mother Nature's firing at you, you just try to stay out of her way, right? Whether it be from the flood or from the tornado potential. And, even when these storms moved inland, they still were producing tornadoes. We had a massive number of tornadoes across Alabama. The South Carolina outbreak we had with, what was it, Nate? Which one was it, Nate?
It was Nate.
I mean, just like huge supercells, like I've never seen. So Florida during Irma, I guess what they issued, like 65 tornado warnings, like a historic number of tornado warnings. That's the whole thing. I mean, a hurricane's not just a wind machine. It moves water. It produces in these bands, tornadoes. So there are multiple hazards with an approaching hurricane coming onshore. And like Ricky mentioned, especially with one that's intensifying.
With Irma, one of the things that caught my attention was, and kind of with Harvey too, is how localized the incredibly damaging part of that eye wall is. When we're talking about communicating hurricanes, I think a lot of times people think the entire 300-mile wide path of the hurricane is going to be like that eye wall. And often that's not the case. But talk about the difficulty in communicating that and trying to have people visualize what may happen.
Well, first of all, we never know exactly where that eye wall is going, right? Because a jog a half a degree north or north or south makes all the difference in the world. And certainly the fact that we had the strongest part of the eye wall go north of Key West, you can clearly see when you come out of Key West, that's where the strongest damage is. It gets worse and worse as you go up through Cudjoe and then into Big Pine Key, and then over toward Everglades City once you get back on, on the mainland again. So, that it was that certainly eastern eye wall that never touched Cuba that hung together the best. But, we got to prepare everybody for what was a 145-mile hurricane. Did we know it was going to lose some of its punch with the interaction with Cuba? As a matter of fact, no, we didn't. We were led to believe from even discussions that it was not going to do that. But thank goodness it did lose a little bit of its steam. But still, look at all the debris. There are people and my friends in Bonita Springs that drive every day by piles and piles of debris. And there are still piles of debris, especially over the Keys. And remember, even though Big Pine Key took the eye wall, there was still a tremendous amount of wind and water up through the upper Keys into Key Largo and you saw what was going on in Miami with Sidell shots, and that's salt water that's coming in to the financial district. So that was just incredible. Jacksonville, the floods in Jacksonville, the tornado warnings that they had, the foot of rain that they had with Irma in Jacksonville, of course, causing historic flooding up there. So, sometimes I don't think we can anticipate everything with these, because each one, I've been in 94 storms. All right. Nate was my 94th, and each one of them has something different, some different type of characteristic.
Was Irma almost a perfect track for the most damage in Florida? Let's say if it had gone a little bit further west, would it have been almost a worst case scenario with flooding on the east side off the Atlantic Ocean, an eye wall potentially coming towards Tampa, and all the surge from Tampa Bay? And of course, flooding in Miami as well.
Yeah. I think the fact that we really lost that western eye wall saved the West Coast, and which is why, remember, the huge evacuations for Southwest Florida were because of the storm surge. So here you've got all these people evacuating because of the storm surge. We're looking at all this video. People are out walking in the bay because the offshore wind was so strong, it actually pushed the water out into the Gulf of Mexico. Should that western eye wall have not collapsed, as soon as that weakened or the storm pulled to the north and that wind changed direction, and we see this all the time, especially in the Outer Banks, that wind comes around from a different direction and then it shoves the water back in and it piles it up back in. And that was the reason for the mass evacuation. But the fact that that thing flirted with Cuba and it lost its western eye wall, I think saved Southwest Florida from a much, much worse case scenario. And like you said, even Tampa Bay, potentially, with the strength of this thing.
The Weather Channel, has Brian Norcross and some other hurricane experts now. Talk about having them and having Brian's experience when it comes to Florida and especially the Miami area.
Brian's just an awesome human being. He knows how to set the right tone for the storm. He obviously knows Florida code, building code. He was a part of all those discussions. Having his expertise is second to none. Yes. Do I miss Michael Lowry? Absolutely. He was a star, and I totally miss him. And I know he missed being on the air this season. But, life is life, and that's the way it goes. But to have Dr. Rick Knabb back, a man that we all respect and admire, and certainly his expertise, and that's, I think, what saved a lot of our coverage, too, because even when we're in the field and we're getting pelted and hammered, the people see that in the field, but to be able to, Dr. Erica Navarro, Erica was great. Right on the scene and boom, right into the fire. And she was just fantastic to have, the conversations going on between, the scientists, the doctors of meteorology and us out in the field reporting. I think kind of paint this picture of what's really going on and send home the message. We ask people, and this is what I tell people all the time. We ask you to evacuate, but just trust us. We're going to put ourselves and our crew in the best position to take you through the storm. We're going to show you, as long as technology allows us to, what's going on out there and what you may deal with when you come back home. Don't worry about it. Evacuate like you're asked. We'll show you what's happening when you're in a safe location and you can watch us on TV.
A couple last points with Irma, and then we'll jump over to Maria. Irma, for not just Florida, but for South Carolina, for Georgia, was a remarkable windstorm. Talk about really the first, I would say, tropical storm in quite a while, or hurricane in quite a while, that went that far inland and produced that much widespread wind damage, maybe since Katrina or Ivan.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, Ivan had a lot of wind damage. But Ivan was known more for its flood in North Georgia. I remember the Coosawattee River in Ellijay rose pretty high, like over 17 feet. Opal back in 1995 was one of those storms that developed rapidly. It was winding down at landfall, but it was also accelerating. It got picked up by a strong trough in October, and it brought a lot of that wind energy up into northern Georgia. And that was, I'm going to say that this situation with the wind was as bad as that, if not worse, possibly even worse for the Atlanta metro area. But it's the first time I think the office, Stelman was telling me, that issued a tropical storm warning. And that's the kind of thing that gets people's attention. Oh my gosh, we have a tropical storm coming. You know what's with tropical storms? You know winds are going to be strong. They're going to be, having the potential to take down tree limbs and obviously cause power losses. So those are the kind of things I think with the tropical storm warning that get people prepared. Nothing beats that.
One last point on Irma from me, and then we'll segue to Shay with Maria. But the power outages, that was the number, I think, that lives on with Irma, just the massive amount of power outage we saw across the state of Florida.
I can't remember the exact number, but it was millions of people without power. And then the fact that it took so long. But I mean, think about this. Where were people going to be staged for this thing? You couldn't really go on the east side because that's where the storm was first going to go. If it shifted west, you couldn't be there. If you shifted off to the east, you could get in the surge now because it's all coming in on the east side of Florida. So I think a lot of the trucks and the logistics were very hard for Florida because Irma's wind field, like you said, was so strong and was going to affect so many areas. So you can't have the recovery trapped in a location where they can't get out and do their job. So logistically, I think that presented a tremendous challenge. The problem is, unlike back in 2005 when Wilma came through and we had a beautiful cold front that pushed it through, temperatures were in the 70s, people could enjoy their windows open even during the day. That's not the case here. It was hot, it was humid. You've got elderly people back in their homes now. It's in the 80s and 90s. So that was really a horrible situation. And you go day one, day two, okay, that's not bad. But day three without power, without a hot shower, day four without power, day five, now you're getting into a humanitarian crisis. So, and certainly, this isn't the greatest segue to Maria. I don't know what is, because they still don't have power back on the entire island, and they won't before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that was the big lesson I learned with Hurricane Isabel in 2003 was the aftermath sucks. There's no other way to put it.
Yes,
we were without power for 2 weeks in Hampton Roads. So,
I mean, one of the things I remember from our new FEMA director, Brock Long, his thing was like, manage your expectations here. Be realistic about the expectations. Or no, actually, I think it was Governor Rick Scott in Florida. He said, don't think that it's going to just get cleaned up and picked up tomorrow or even in the next week. This is a big hurricane. It's going to cause a lot of problems. Manage your expectations. I thought that was, I remember that. I remember we played that bite a lot to people, and I know it's easier said than done, but I think it set a very good tone for how people dealt with the storm afterward.
Shay, you had something you wanted to bring in with regards to Maria?
Yeah, speaking of aftermaths, I was here for Hugo in '89, and that was pretty devastating here for Charleston, as well as many other spots around the South Carolina coast, and even inland, pushing inland all the way to the mid-state and up into North Carolina.
Yeah, remember the tree damage for Charlotte? I remember that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was incredible. And eerily similar was the track of Maria to start heading across Puerto Rico, which was just on the tail of Irma, surprisingly enough. And one thing I want to ask you was, how surprised were you to see a rapid intensification of another Category 5 right behind Irma in the same area? I know Irma was a little bit further to the north over Anguilla and then went across BVI, USVI, but Maria was very close. And you would think that the ocean sea surface temperatures would have cooled.
They never cooled. Yeah. Right. They never. Okay. So what does that tell you? We have very deep ocean heat content. So that's a little bit of an alarm that I think we need to look into. Why didn't we get upwelling? And so what Shay's leading to, guys, is the fact that when you get these storm tracks, especially with powerful hurricanes in their wind field, they're going to essentially pull up the cooler water from below. But the problem is there's so much hot water deep into the ocean. There wasn't, okay, fine. You went from 30 Celsius to 28 Celsius or 26 Celsius. That's still plenty warm enough to support, tropical development, especially given the fact that if you look at the main development region and the shear for really July, August, and September, and even into early October, there was no shear. So these things had free reign to just explode and go bonkers. But I think, ocean heat content and these warm ocean waters that we had this year set the tone. And then the fact that the shear essentially just stopped. Now you've got a chance to get a big monster. And unfortunately, we got 3 of them.
Yep. It sort of makes you think what's causing the rapid intensification. I know that's sort of an ongoing study, and
yes,
folks want to understand that more. But even with, trying to factor in sea surface temperatures, and you look at the Saharan air layer for dust, and you look at all these different factors in the same area within a week or 9 days, 2 major hurricanes formed, and they were able to withhold their energy all through this area. And like you said, deep water, the epipelagic zone is very deep with the warm water all the way down to 200 meters at least. How the Caribbean, the deep Caribbean, Central and Western Caribbean, certainly had higher ocean heat content. But what does that say for the data that we're getting for other areas?
In terms of what, though? In terms of what we can see out of some of these storms?
In terms of what kind of data we're getting from satellite feed on sea surface temperatures and other forms of data over, say, the Leeward Islands or the Windward Islands.
I think it's something we have to pay attention to. Is this where, in fact, the carbon's being stored? Is this where the heat's being stored? Probably yes. I think Ophelia is another great example of, even though we didn't really see an impact from that, we should study that. Look at how far north it was, and it stayed a hurricane. What kept it a hurricane, even when the water temperature dropped below 80 degrees, dropped below 75 degrees, even down in the upper 60s, you still had a very definable eye wall on satellite. What's going on here? So obviously, like you said, it's not just the water; it's other drivers in the atmosphere that are helping to cause these storms to explode. But I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anybody does really. What makes these things go from a depression to a storm to all of a sudden really the top of the scale for the Atlantic Basin, which we saw 3 times essentially.
All right, well, let's kind of recap here. It's a little bit after 7:30 here. We'll let Jim take a quick break. I do want to bring in Ashley Morris. She is Emergency Management Specialist for Williamson County, Texas. So Ashley is joining us as well. So Ashley, happy to have you this evening. And Ashley will be joining us for the next several shows. So maybe more of a regular figure here on the Carolina Weather Group. So Ashley, we appreciate that. We are with Jim Cantori tonight, kind of recapping the 2017 tropics and just the active season that it has been so far. And so far, we have got a lot of comments coming in on the show. Shay, I think you and Peter had a few questions that were from our viewers. So if you want to draw those up right quick, and then we'll toss it back to Ricky, and we'll kind of finish the second half of our interview for the show.
Okay, mine comes from I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ricky. Is that you?
Go ahead, Shay. My bad.
Okay. Jeannie Cahill asks, is there such a thing as an area being due for a big hurricane because one hasn't happened in years? We went for a long stint for well over a decade of no major hurricane landfalls in the United States. But for example, another Hugo, my thought is that it depends on weather patterns and all the factors coming together that things just happen. That there may be more of a chance location, but I don't believe an area can be due for one. What do you think?
If you live on the coast, you're just as due as anybody else. Sure. Are there more hurricane prone areas over the years climatologically? Yes. South Florida, the upper Texas coast, Louisiana, the Outer Banks certainly come to mind. There are more areas that just kind of stick out there than others. We haven't had a lot of action in Jacksonville, but tell the folks that. I mean, they had to deal with Matthew last year, on the St. Johns River. They had to deal with Irma, which was here on the west side, weakening in Florida, but you still had high water rise and issues with storm surge. So, impacts go much, much farther away from the center. And that's why we always tell everybody, don't pay attention to just where that center is going. That's what the cone represents, yes. But those impacts, and I do love, you guys mentioned earlier about the hurricane center changes. I do love the fact that you see the wind field now, like the tropical storm wind field on the cone. So that gives a kind of a nice visual to people that, oh, wow, I'm going to get tropical storm force winds. Even though we're on the cone, we're going to get tropical storm force wind gusts, and we need to prepare for that. So that's what I think is a good answer to that question.
As working in emergency management, is that something you guys have really liked this year, especially with like Harvey and storms that have come close to Texas?
Yeah, definitely. Basically, we're always just preparing for any kind of hurricanes that might come our way. We kind of knew this season would be a little more to expect on the hurricane spectrum, especially because of the ocean temperatures and the lack of shear, like he was saying. So it definitely would impact our preparedness and our side of that. Cool. And also, just to join into, I'll take any other emergency management aspect questions that you guys might have.
Very good. I'm sure we'll come back to you. We were just getting ready to talk about Maria, so I'm sure we'll probably jump back in with that here in just a minute. We had another viewer question from Peter, right?
Yeah, we sure do. I'm sorry if you hear any noise. There's a delivery coming through, so just ignore that. But Shamar Davis wants to know what Jim thinks about the tornadoes this year in Georgia. There was a lot of tornado outbreaks and stuff in Georgia this year.
It's really fun. I was just talking to somebody about that yesterday. We had 214 tornadoes in the state of Georgia. I think that's a record for the state in terms of the numbers. I don't know where it lies nationally in terms of state rank, but it's got to be up there. But whether it be from this going from late winter with how the atmosphere kind of set up, it just seemed like the atmosphere wanted to unload on Georgia. And no, we can't predict who's next in line for the next disaster, but sometimes the atmosphere does repeat itself. We saw that in 2004 with the hurricane barrage in Florida. I think sometimes you see that, we've seen it in Alabama, certainly in past years. We've seen it in Oklahoma with tornadoes that almost go over the exact same areas. So we can get little mini patterns that set up that can repeat themselves. And sometimes it may be just that same year that they set up. That doesn't always happen. I don't think you can rely on that. But for whatever reason, the atmosphere kind of locked everything together for tornado genesis on the state of Georgia this year, sadly enough. Plus, you had hurricanes.
Okay, one more question. Jeff Woodard asked, did you give the SWAT gear back to Fort Myers PD?
I did not, because the lady who made it for them said, Jim, you can actually keep it. And so you will see it out on a future hurricane. And I'm totally stoked to have it as a part of the arsenal. So we got the wetsuit, the dry suit now. Now we got we got some body armor. So I'm psyched.
We're going to have the official Jim Cantori like armor pack, like those helmets for tornadoes. We're going to have that hurricanes coming.
Tactical tropical pack.
I got to be honest with you guys. I definitely felt safer out there with that on. I mean, I got to be honest with you. Maybe it's just old age. I don't know, but it was nice to know that you had wind and debris flying around over your head.
Hey,
to just have that on there.
I've got one more. I know I just got this one from actually one of the guys that I work with. And Jim, you had mentioned it earlier about Tropical Storm Nate and the tornadoes that happened in North Carolina. They wanted to know maybe if you could kind of talk about how the higher terrain in South and North Carolina kind of intensifies those tornadoes as they're moving into the hillier locations of Western South Carolina and Western North Carolina.
I mean, I first of all, I just think the whole atmosphere was set up that day. Okay, so now here you have this band, that's associated with the storm as it's come ashore, now rotating up into that instability, and these storms just blew up. You had some great shear, get some great low-level shear, but what can certainly happen there is you do have frictional effects from the mountains. I mean, people think a lot of times that once the storm get in the mountain, they're just going to disappear. No. I mean, I remember seeing video in 2011 of a tornado literally going over the hill and coming back down the other side of it intact. Okay, so sometimes the winds, the topography itself can actually create stronger inflow into these supercells and just be enough to maybe kick off tornado genesis. But even these were storms that were coming out of the Midlands and moving to the north, and they had hooks on them. It was just like I just remember I think I was getting on a plane or something after that, like, oh my God, look at these things. These are like Midwest, plain supercells here, and they're going to be awful, and in some cases they were. They caused a lot of damage. But you can get the topography enhancing tornado genesis. Ricky, you know that, being in Eastern North Carolina.
Yeah, we have a tornado in my DMA, Camp Creek 2011, that the Weather Service thinks actually was caused by it coming down off a mountain and kind of the vortex stretching and all that's involved with that. So I'll send you some information on that when I dig it up. Let's quickly jump over to Maria. We're getting close to top of the hour here. Jim, Maria was just a storm for Puerto Rico that they have not seen in so many years. And really, it's going to be one that goes down in Puerto Rican history, I think.
No question. When a storm moves essentially over the longest part of the island, and just because it wasn't a 5 anymore, it was still a strong 4. There's really not a lot of difference. When you see trees stripped of their leaves and stripped of bark, something pretty powerful went through there. Okay, so whether it was a 4 or 5, a strong 4 or a minimal 5, it didn't matter. It was still really the same essential physics going on there in terms of intensity. How can an island prepare for something like that? I don't know if you can. It's not like we can pre-position supplies somewhere on the island, especially given that track. All right, I think we certainly do have to do a better job in how we're going to rebuild Puerto Rico to get them back on their feet, because, let's face it, they're right there in a climatological favored path of hurricanes that come across the ocean. So it won't be their last hurricane, unfortunately. Hopefully it'll be their last one that's that strong. But that was, probably the worst hurricane that Puerto Rico's ever had.
Ashley, can you speak for a moment on the difficulties of getting supplies to an area after a storm? Obviously, Puerto Rico is an island, so it's got its own challenges. But just from like a landlocked location in Texas, the difficulties of getting supplies in the wake of a storm.
Yeah, definitely. So one of our big jobs in emergency management is going to be management of resources. So it's our job to assess what we need, and it's our job to get it there, while also keeping documentation and also making sure that we manage that along with the budget, because we're designated a certain amount to spend on that kind of thing. The big issue with that is, like you said, it's an island, and it's not necessarily a big piece of land like we have in the continental US. So the first thing you'd want to do is just establish a place to put all of the goods. And if you have an island that's just widely devastated, it's going to be pretty hard to kind of find a place to triage all of those materials. Shipping it over there too. I think a really big problem with resources as well was we were still reeling from Harvey.
Yes.
And the other impacts that we had on this side. So FEMA had a ton of resources and people and manpower already going into those disasters. So I think that really hurt the recovery efforts there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, it's the first year, once again, that we've had so many numerous landfalls and had to deal with them all at once. Let's hit on 2 more topics here. One of the big things I think this year, Jim, was GOES 16 and some of the first images we've got from an awesome satellite on a hurricane season. Just give us your thoughts on some of the images we've seen.
Go right back to Puerto Rico losing their radar. Okay. And the only thing they have now is data that they can look at from GOES 16. And that high resolution data allowed them to continue to make forecasts, continue to look at other tropical waves that may not have developed, but we're going to have some pretty heavy rain with them. Because of that higher resolution satellite, I think they were allowed to make really good forecasts going forward, especially for the recovery effort, which was pretty much widespread over the entire island.
I remember there were some flash flood warnings actually
based
off satellite data.
Based off satellite data. The other thing too, and we haven't talked about this because we're talking about hurricanes, is one of the things I learned in the GOES 16 class is you can actually see fires before a lot of them have even been reported. Mm-hmm. Okay, so some of the, which is awesome. To get a head start on a fire, especially one that's a wind-driven fire, is huge. Didn't help California this year, unfortunately, but some of these places in the plains in eastern Colorado, where sometimes we get these brush fires, you can see them long before anybody's even reported them. So having GOES 16, the slew of data, the new data satellite that just went up,
JPSS.
What is it? JPSS. I think that's going to be fantastic in getting even more data into the models in the future. The more data we can get, the better we can crunch those numbers. The higher the resolution, we're going to get, I think, better output. But let's not take away from what we had this year. In the best track forecasts, I think it was from Eric Blake, that we've ever had in the history of hurricanes. So that's a good thing, because as bad as they are, at least we have an idea they're coming, right?
Eric, I think you had a question real quick.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Jim. You mentioned a couple of times, once off the top and then again a few minutes ago, about, a couple of these storms kind of getting towards their max potential. I know Irma got up to 185 miles an hour, stayed there for a long time in pretty nearly ideal conditions. Do you have any thoughts on given kind of the state of the climate as it is right now, is that about as big as you can expect at this point, at least as far as wind strength? I know you got a lot of different types of impacts, but how much stronger can something like that get with the ideal circumstances?
That's a great question. I think that's pretty much the top of the scale. Could we get to 190, 200 miles an hour? Potentially. Let's think about it. These are heat engines, right? So they're going to drive off that ocean heat content. And if we can get the process to take in as much heat as we can give it, sure, you can. It's like giving it higher octane, right? Just like a car engine. So for now, yeah, what we've seen is the top of the scale. But could that scale go up? I think so, a little bit.
Well, we see some 200s, in the Western Pacific more often, because you don't have as many islands in the way to disrupt and so forth before they get there.
But the other thing too is, it's one thing getting there, but to stay at that intensity, to maintain that intensity with literally nothing to stop it. No wind shear, no cooler water, or no upwelling. That's what was most amazing to me, the hours that we spent at that max intensity.
And Jim, that kind of gets me into this next topic, which is ACE. Let me make sure to present this to everybody. Philip Flutzbach, for September, the highest ACE I think ever recorded for the Atlantic Basin.
There you go.
And that shows you a picture right there of just how warm, how much ocean heat content we had. What do you think this means? I know that we had the Pacific was really in a lower state of activity. And while the Atlantic was really blowing up, and we weren't even in a La Nina phase at that time, what does this mean to you?
That number on its own right is amazing for the Atlantic Basin in any month. Obviously, you're going to see that peaked out during the peak of our season. But think about that, too, in the fact that a lot of these storms went over the same tracks. So, could we have had a higher ACE even? I just think it represents a perfect atmosphere over the main development region when these hurricanes reach their full potential. And like I said, guys, that's what was most amazing. That's what that says. These things stayed about as strong as they could be for as many days as they possibly could. Steering flow was light, so there was no easterly shear. It was incredible. It was an incredible sight to watch, both on the satellite and certainly, sadly, the aftermath.
And what do you think this may hold for the future? I know I've seen a few articles starting to come out now about possible next year and maybe the numbers being a little bit higher as well there.
Look, if we go into the season, certainly with a La Nina or a similar wind setup, and I think with similar ocean water temperatures, I think we can expect similar hurricanes. Will they follow the same paths? Nobody knows that, but there's nothing that says the Atlantic won't keep churning out powerful hurricanes when you have a light shear, warm ocean, couplet, if you will, like we had this year.
Let's see, Scotty, you had a question to bring in real quick, and then I want to jump over social media.
Yeah, we had one last. And sorry, guys, for all those who are watching. We've got so many questions for Jim, and we have just a little bit of time, but this kind of fits in with what we're talking about. This is from Rick Lossie. Rick was saying 2004, 2005 was kind of back-to-back bad hurricane seasons. Do you feel like 2018 may be kind of a bookmark of another bad season?
Again, we never know how many are going to reach land. But, could we get similar strength in some of these hurricanes? Could we get another 3 to 6 majors? I think it's absolutely possible. And think about it. We started off in April with what could have been, you remember, an El Nino coming in for forecast for the late fall. So I think a lot of those predictions initially were down. And once our confidence was there in the fact that we weren't going to get that El Nino, then it's like, oh, look, now we've got nothing. Now we really don't have anything with some of these other parameters that we're seeing with the warm water and the light shear, that there's no reason why we shouldn't get very powerful storms. And so it was kind of later on, you saw a lot of these forecasts come around. So now we start with kind of a clean slate. Will the numbers be high going in? Possibly. But again, it all depends on how many of these affect land. If they all stay over the water, that's great news for everybody. But if they start touching North America and the Caribbean, not good, right? That's what matters. How much the impact we have.
People matter. Jim?
Yep.
Not Jim, I'm sorry. James. I mean, Jay's in here tonight. Let's bring you in. You had a question.
It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, my mother still calls me Jim. And Jim, thanks for coming on tonight. I wanted to know, from a broadcast perspective, how has social media, how has tool sets like the National Weather Service chat changed your job over the years?
I love chat. I love, Twitter. I think for us as meteorologists, the longer we can make it. I mean, do we need to use all 280 characters? I don't know. But I think for us as broadcasters and in even NWS, whether you're private or government, the fact that we can now explain a little bit more about where we want to go with that tweet is better for us. We can, if this, then that, because there's never a clear-cut answer when we go to a forecast. Right? There's always some subtleties that we should certainly mention when it comes to kind of throwing out that forecast. But I think Twitter's a great tool. I've always loved it. I've met a lot of great people on Twitter, people I haven't even met yet at a conference. There's a lot of people I pay attention to and even learn from. I think it's educational for us as scientists and the public as well. Sure. Are there times where Jim puts out a tweet that's incorrect or there's a picture that comes across Twitter that's an old storm? The wonderful thing is Twitter self-corrects pretty quickly. And I think overall, there's a lot of good that wants to be accomplished by Twitter and a lot of good information that gets out there. And I certainly think it's a huge part of our arsenal now in communicating the message.
All right. Jim, I want you, if you can, to pick one of the three major storms and which one will go down as the most, or I guess the most memorable storm for 2017, Maria, Irma, or Harvey?
For me personally?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, because it has to be. I mean, because if you're in Puerto Rico, Harvey doesn't mean much to you, right? So for me personally, I mean, I think Harvey was certainly the most challenging, just because it was a multi-hat. We went from, the eye wall destruction to, all of a sudden jumping into Houston's chaos and the flood. And to not only see the predictions for that come true, I thought was a great thing for us meteorologically, but sadly it was right over a metro area, our fourth largest city in the country. So that one to me stands out. I think all three of them will be retired in terms of their names because of what they were and the history that's associated with each one of them. But Harvey to me was certainly the most challenging, especially coming off of, like I started the show with you guys, this euphoric moment for the country and watching this beautiful eclipse go from the West Coast to the East Coast and out over the Atlantic. And then literally the next day being in position to talk about what could be, it wasn't supposed to be a Category 4, but now we know we have a hurricane potentially coming toward the Texas coast. And that's how quick we had to change things over. So I'm going to remember probably for me, Harvey the most.
Certainly a very memorable storm. All right. Well, I think we've hit on most of the topics of the 2017 hurricane season. We've got a lot of viewers in North Carolina, and a lot of them want to know about snow. And so if you're all right with it, let's segue for just a minute. And I want to ask if you have any memorable North Carolina snowstorms.
Yes, and it's the one I wasn't there for. Okay. So here comes this, because first of all, it's very difficult to forecast and pinpoint snow in the South. You have to forecast the timing, what time of the day does it happen. The other thing is too, is it going to go to 40 degrees the next day, or is it going to go to 14 and stay that way for 3 days? like we had in Atlanta, which was a complete disaster. So there's a lot of things that go in addition to the snowfall forecast. But this particular situation was for Charlotte, and it was kind of a two-pronged storm. One wave would come up and dump the first round of snow. That busted. So they busted me and brought me home. But now I came home, and Charlotte got 6 to 8 inches of snow that evening and overnight. Of course, it was a complete disaster the next day. So that one was the most memorable one for me, certainly in the state of North Carolina. The one that I missed.
You got any thoughts on the upcoming pattern and what it may mean for snow on the East Coast?
Well, we're definitely going to a big trough. Okay, the warm 70s that we're dealing with and 60s that we're dealing with are going to be gone by next Wednesday. We're going to have the front off the East Coast. I think if you're going to get active weather, we need to get some big undulations in the pattern. We're going to see that. What results out of that, nobody really knows yet. But I certainly think that gives us a better chance to kind of get out of really what has been a very mundane pattern, a very great pattern for people that have been traveling to and from grandma's house for Thanksgiving. I mean, you had very, very little in the way of problems nationally, but I think that is going to change certainly as we get into the probably about the December 6th through 10th, and then heading potentially toward Christmas. We'll see.
All right, Jim. One question about snow. It's not really dealing with the Carolinas.
Does that have anything to do with thunder?
Not only are you great at covering hurricanes and tornadoes, talk to us about the thunder snow episodes. You've got to witness a lot of these, something that a lot of us have never really got to witness. So talk to us about your excitement of witnessing this.
Yeah, so on live television, guys, I've been in 5 of these episodes, which is just unthinkable, first of all. To even have 5 with or without being on TV is a whole amazing part. But the last one, of course, was February 15th of 2015, when it just never stopped snowing in Boston. And I'll give you kind of a little inside story on that. I was basically in Boston covering the snowstorm. And we didn't have to move because every other day there was a forecast for snow and impact snow for the Boston metro area. So they're like, Jim, listen, we want you to get down to the Cape because the winds are going to be a little bit stronger and you're going to get some heavy snow. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll do that. And so Reynolds Wolf took over for me in Boston. So here I am in Plymouth. Reynolds is in Boston. At about 5:05 in the morning, I see him getting thunder and lightning in his shot. I was completely demoralized. I'm like, no, I just left there. I could have gotten the thunder. So I was completely demoralized. I literally went face down in the snow. 15 minutes later, I got it. And so I went from down here to way up here, literally in just a minute. So the euphoria, that's what created, I think, that whole reaction. And then it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again right in that spot. So now when I go out and cover a snowstorm, okay, it's not about where's the most snow going to be, but where and when are we going to get the potential for thunder snow? That's the first thing I'm looking at these days. Now, again, I want to kind of put a little asterisk here. Do I encourage people to go out when there's thunder and lightning? No, I do not. And I probably shouldn't be out there as well. All right, we all know that. But there's just, I can't tell you what it is, but there's just something about being out there when it's snowing literally 2, 3, 4 inches an hour, and all of a sudden you get a flash of lightning. The whole sky goes pink and purple. You hear this muffled thunder come through. It's just kind of the atmosphere at its best in a wintertime situation. And frankly, it's just cool to be out in it. It really is. It just gets me pretty jacked.
I remember the first time I experienced thunder snow. I was like 7 years old. It was a minor snow event we had in Hampton Roads. It scared the hell out of me because I didn't expect thunder and lightning.
Right. But see that though, it's that coastal land interface. Yeah. So you, especially with a developing nor'easter or coastal low, you know that land ocean interface kind of gives you a chance to get these strong bands that come in off the ocean and produce the elevated thunder and lightning. So it's pretty cool. And it's really weird because I grew up in Vermont. So I never really experienced it that far inland, or if I did, it was in the mountains somewhere where I couldn't hear it down in the Connecticut River Valley, which is where I lived. But to get it for the first time in Worcester in 1995, and Chicago twice, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and of course Plymouth, Mass. It's been a good ride, man.
How coming up in North Carolina, it seems like we always end up with thunder snow just because you have to have strong dynamics in play to get snow.
Yes, to get snow in the first place. Yep.
So
yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep.
All righty. Well, we've really enjoyed you coming on tonight, and thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Let people know how they can get in touch with you on social media and stuff if they want to follow your tweets and maybe send a tweet.
Yeah, I'm at Jim Cantori. For the record, I don't do much on Facebook. A lot of my tweets will go to my Facebook page. I typically use Twitter for my profession, for meteorology. And, if you want to see what Cantori's doing in his personal life a little bit more, you can follow me on Instagram. That's where I keep, show a lot of pictures of what I'm doing with my family. And, I'm kind of a big tree nut. I collect Japanese maples. You can see all the great color we've had this fall with some of my Japanese maples. So that's my life in a nutshell here, guys. But I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
And since we're the Carolina Weather Group, and I see so many race cars behind you, do you have a favorite NASCAR driver?
Bobby Labonte was kind of the first guy that I kind of attached myself to. Love watching Jimmy Johnson, Truex Jr., who just won. I'm glad to see him win. I started collecting a couple of his cars way back when. So, and I'll tell you right now, I went for a ride with Kyle Busch in the NBC car, and I'm telling you right now, of course, I'm in the drive. You remember, I'm in the passenger side, and Kyle's we're going around, and I'm right near the wall. I'm right up against the wall. That was one of the most incredible things. But Busch is a heck of a driver. He really is a phenomenal race car driver.
Scotty will tell you Jimmy Johnson's my guy, and he can tell you how much of a fan I am. So we'll get along well, Jim. So
hey, Jim, we want to have you out at Charlotte Motor Speedway maybe one time next year, and we'd love to show you around and come enjoy our weather stuff that we do there.
Let's do it. I mean, think about it, guys. There isn't any sport that is more susceptible to running or not running than NASCAR, right? And as well as I do, Scotty. I mean, the way they tune those engines, whether they're vying for position on a Friday night, and then the front comes through and it's colder and drier on Sunday, you have to totally retune the race car. So there's a lot that goes in. People have no idea how much weather goes into to race car driving. So it's a big deal. I'll be happy to do it, brother.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much. We truly have enjoyed this hour, and we'd love to have you back on whenever your schedule allows.
Let's do it. In the meantime, let's hope we set up the pattern for some active snow.
Yeah, right? Hey, that's what we're all wishing for.
I'm ready to get out the door, guys. I'm starting to shake a little bit. I got to get out the door.
Except for those meteorologists like me who got off Christmas for the first time and don't want a major white Christmas, all right? Let it snow in January or something.
Point well taken, Ricky. Point well taken.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. We appreciate it. We know you got to get off because you got the Weather Channel duties in the morning. So once again, from all of us, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get to sleep now. You guys had me talk about thunder snow on the last segment here, so I'm pretty jacked up now. But thank you. Seriously, let's do it again sometime. All right?
We'd love to. Thank you. Have a good one, Jim.
All right. Thank you. You too, guys.
All right, guys. Well, that was Jim Cantori. What a great show. Ashley, we do have one question for you. One of our viewers was watching. Her name also Ashley Patton. She was wanting to know, since with your background in emergency management, what should folks do to be prepared for tropical activity now that we're in the off season? What do you recommend folks to do now while the tropics are quiet to get ready for next year?
Well, that's going to kind of depend on where you live. So if you're living on the coast, you're going to want to take measures that have to do with storm surge and wind damage that might come your way. But if you're living inland, like our county is quite a bit inland, we're not so worried about the wind and the surge impacts. We're worried about the inland flooding. So depending on your geography, which I'm not sure exactly where she's at, if you know. Do you know?
I do not. She did not say.
Okay, so I'll just take it from the inland perspective. So for my residents, I want them to have an idea of what they're going to do if we have flooding, which actually we have a lot of flash flooding as it is. So the plan would be very similar to what we would do during the summer for flooding. But we want people to have a place to go, because I saw this a lot in Houston. If you're going to go up to the higher stories and up to your attics and things like that, you need to take something sharp so you can get out onto the roof, because we don't want you trapped in there. So having a plan if you need to get to higher ground is important. We really want to hit home also people knowing if they're in the floodplain with insurance and documentation. So if you are around, a river or stream in your area, you want to make sure that your house is protected and your stuff is protected and that you have coverage for those kinds of losses. And if you go ahead and go through your house now and take pictures and do things like that, and claims later.
Very good points. Gotti?
Yes, those are good points. Sorry, I was reading another tweet there. Just a lot of people appreciating the show tonight. So before that, I know we do tweets of the week, but before we do that, I want Ashley to kind of introduce herself. Ashley was scheduled to be on our show a couple of weeks from now, but with tonight's show and next week's show, I thought they were pretty vital to have Ashley in with us because they affected her area. Ashley lives just outside of the Texas coast. So, Ashley, before we get into the latter part of the show, I'll let you introduce yourself, kind of tell all of our followers and listeners tonight what you do, and then we'll talk about the shows you're going to be on in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so as you guys know, my name is Ashley Morris. I am an emergency management specialist for Williamson County Emergency Management. Like I said, our county is quite a bit inland, but we still have tropical threats. At my current position, I'm in charge of writing emergency plans. So that might be our response plans for weather, severe weather, tornadoes. It could also be for hazmat incidents and also human impact incidences, which sometimes we forget. Not all disasters are natural, so we have to kind of cover all of that. So I'm spending my time writing those plans and also doing a lot of educational outreach to the public because we have studies that show if people are more prepared before the storm hits, recovery is actually quicker.
And Ashley, with this hurricane season being so memorable and this our topic tonight being hurricanes, I want to get your thoughts just real quick on hurricane season 2017 and what it meant for people in Texas and just kind of the emergency management agencies in general.
I think this season definitely was a wake-up call, especially because we haven't had too many land hurricanes occurring in our area. I think a lot of people have gotten really complacent just from the lack of storms, and that includes emergency managers. We know we're supposed to be prepared, and we know that we have the plans to do so, but we do get a little more laid back if we're not constantly going through those plans. So this season was definitely a wake-up call. And I can say from experience, when I was watching the storm way out there about a week or two before it even made landfall, I was telling my director about it, and he was like, no, I don't think it's going to happen. Like, he was very laid back about it. And I don't know if that's wishful thinking or just we're used to not having them happen. So it's definitely changing. I think the fact that the rain band lined up over Houston like it did is going to make really big impacts on mitigation. And that's what we really want to see is in the rebuilding areas, mitigation being pushed, which keeping up on social media, I think that a lot of emergency managers are pushing rebuilding and mitigation styles, which is needed. So I'm kind of hoping that what Houston is doing in their recovery will actually funnel more towards the whole state, because I think as emergency managers, we get focused on response and not preparing and trying to prevent the devastation beforehand.
Very good points. All right, Scotty, did you want to do tweets of the week here?
It's up to you guys. Do you guys want to share tweets? Yes, no?
Well, I've got one I want to show it, even
Okay.
if everyone else gets the foghorn tonight, because it's very timely. And it comes from the Hampton, Virginia Police Department, my hometown. And after Hurricane Maria, which impacted Puerto Rico, they actually had an officer who couldn't get in touch with his father down there. And so he went to Puerto Rico with a couple other Hampton Police Department officers, and they put together this cool video. I just retweeted it on my account. So if you want to go out there and check that out, it's a really cool tweet and a really cool story.
I have a tweet of the week just because I told this gentleman I would share his tweet of the week. So let me pull that up right quick. This was really cool and something that many people probably didn't know you could do. If I could get screen share to work. All right. So this is from Lee Davis. Lee is he's like a weather enthusiast here in North Carolina. A lot of us here in this panel probably know Lee from chatting in the weather chats that we do, but this was taken from the Parkway late last week. This is Blue Ridge Parkway, and on a clear, sunny day, you can see the skyline of Charlotte, which is about 90 miles away from where this photo was taken. I'll be sure, and it may be hard to see right now, but I'll retweet this out and let everyone see this picture. But again, on a clear, sunny day, just after Thanksgiving, up on the Blue Ridge Parkway, the city of Charlotte, the skyscrapers of Charlotte was able to be seen. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is neat. Jared?
All right.
One up?
Yeah, got mine. Yep. So happy birthday to Go 16. And tomorrow at 12Z, it begins its drift maneuver to its operational position as goes east, which means we're going to be out without that sweet data for a couple weeks. Jim gets the shakes from not getting out into the field. I'm going to get the shakes from not having just absolutely gorgeous 16 bands of beautiful high resolution satellite data, but it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. And we're going to have some really amazing data to be able to work with. Again, Go 16 was a phenomenal tool this season, and really excited to have it as goes east to see, hopefully, a bunch of hurricanes miss land masses over the next 10 years of its operational life. So, so that drift maneuver begins tomorrow. And then from November 14th to the 20th, I would say anytime in there, it becomes operational goes and going. So there you go.
All right. And we know where it's going. We know it's going to 89.5 west. Mm-hmm. Which happens to get a very good view of Memphis. So we're just very pleased that it's coming right over the put Memphis right in the center of its amazing regional coverage. As always, right in the middle of everything.
I think Memphis, we should have mentioned this on the show, but I think you guys in Memphis was pretty much in the middle of all of the tropical activities.
we were the inland location where all of the storms came to die, I think, this year. So pretty good.
On a shirt. It'll be the next publicity design shirt.
Yes, there you go. I will share what I have tonight. Let's see if I can get it here. Oh, sorry. Hang on just a second. Sorry about that.
While Eric is doing that, I want to give a shout out to Peter and James and Shay. They've been working on a lot of stuff this afternoon, and especially thanks to Jared for the new drop-down boxes, little 1/3 things that you see on our names. So thank you to that, gentleman.
Yeah, they look great. All right, so this is from Knoxville at a football game. This was November 18th when there was a strong front that came through, and actually this front came through Memphis when we were playing a home game earlier in the day. We had a midday right around noontime, and Knoxville, the Vols were playing in the evening, and there was actually, this was ahead of that line of storms, but I don't know if people have seen this, but looks like the video is not going to play. I'll just kind of fast forward. There's a piece of the scoreboard that flew off and hit somebody in the environmental winds out ahead of the line. So it wasn't actually, it was before the line got there, but it came down from the scoreboard, and there it is. I could make some jokes about the state of UT football with that, but I won't go there because I'm very tempted.
I'm sure that's really filled up your timeline this weekend, hasn't it, Ricky?
Oh, gosh. I've never seen people more angry. It was kind of awesome. But that's remarkable, though. Eric, a lot of times, as you know, across Tennessee, we get these very strong gradient winds ahead of a cold front. And I'll tell you, I have never worked in an area like this one before where we get such strong winds, especially sometimes we get these mountain wave wind events that come in, and you just get such strong gusts ahead of the front. Sometimes 60, 80 miles per hour. Of course, we're approaching the anniversary, or we're past the anniversary now, yesterday, of Gatlinburg. And that was ahead of a front, a mountain wave wind event that just had those gusty winds right there in the Knoxville area. So
that particular front came through, and it moved very quickly. So it dropped rain it was pretty torrential, but it lasted about 15 or 20 minutes, caused a 60-minute lightning delay that we had here. But like you said, the gradient winds out ahead of it, straight out of the south were
probably in the 30 to 35 mile an hour range. And then as soon as that front moved through, they shifted around to the northwest, and we gusted almost to 50 behind the front. So just a, very powerful frontal system that moved through.
We had a gust 58 at the or 60 at the Tri-Cities Airport. Actually triggered severe thunderstorm warning with a non-thunderstorm. It's funny how those go sometimes. Shay, you had something?
Yeah, Ricky. Let's see. I'm trying to get this to play. I may have to reload it here. But this is the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico erupting on November the 24th, which was pretty phenomenal to be able to catch. They caught on surveillance video. I do have a little bit of a cleaner version here on YouTube, where you can actually see it in color and that black and white up to the right corner. But it sent plumage and ash up to, 3,280 feet, about 2 kilometers above its peak. So pretty neat to catch a major eruption like that on camera. And speaking of which, we have a little bit of other volcanic activity going on around the world. In Indonesia, Bali, Mount Agung has erupted. So, we're starting to see that a little bit more and more. We have some earthquake activity followed by some volcanic activities around those areas. So, pretty neat to see it all.
Shay, could you say that one more time?
Please. Say the name of the volcano.
The volcano, sorry.
Oh, the Popocatépetl?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the I think that's the language of the bells from what I remember in my Spanish concentration was some of the different languages in Mexico, but that one ends in a TL, so it's like the bells of the la.
You don't get that on any other weather podcast than this one right here. So,
but there's one now. There's some town in Ireland that I want to learn, and I can't remember. It's really, really long and funky, and it's a challenge to meteorologists. But if you can sneak that into a forecast, it's pretty amazing if you can pull it off right without stuttering.
Did you guys see the video from Morgan Palmer up in Washington of all the river names? They all started with S, and there were like 8 or 9 of them. I'll have to find that and retweet it. But it was pretty crazy, all the ones he had to say. And he earned his money that night for sure.
And Shay, while you're on, want to say thank you for lining up that interview. That was really cool, and I think we've all been wanting to get Jim on for a long time, and you was able to hit a home run. So I appreciate that, and I think a lot of our followers do. We had a big turnout tonight and a lot of good comments and questions. So thank you for that.
Sure thing. Yeah, he was excited about coming on tonight. So we're. Now that he's been on the show and enjoyed, we had great conversation. I mean, we covered a lot of topics in 1 hour. I'm telling you, to wrap up a season in 1 hour with a prominent figure like that is amazing. We covered a lot of ground there. But man, we're looking forward to our future shows. What do we have coming up?
Well, before you do that, I do want to say we had a joining. Peter and James finally got to meet in the Starbucks in Philly. So, gentlemen, how's your afternoon been?
Oh, it's just wonderful. It's just how you doing,
Scotty? In the history of this show, has 2 panelists ever sit together?
I don't think so. This is a first.
Yeah, I think so too.
We broke records.
This was a record-breaking show.
Next up, we'll have the just like Weather Brains. We'll have to start doing shows from the NWA conference.
Let's see. Shay and I have met, and then Ricky and I, we've met many times, but I don't think that we've ever had 2 panelists on together at the same time.
I was curious if Peter ever got out of his closet or not, to be honest with you. He managed to move to the local Starbucks. So.
Well, how do you know this isn't a green screen behind me?
True. Kind of looks like a closet.
I mean,
big closet. Walk-in closet.
So James, how has your visit been to Philly? I mean, did Peter give you the deluxe
I need to thank Peter and his local Starbucks for their hospitality.
Peter, we'll let you tag them on Twitter this week. Maybe we can get a conversation like we do with Cinnabon.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I dissed Cinnabon this week. Sorry about that. I should have. Yeah, I should have given him one, but
make him. Hey, it's still 8 o'clock. The mall's still open.
Oh yeah, they're going to be throwing us at a Starbucks in a minute.
And Jared, once again, thank you for your graphic designing skills today. Awesome stuff.
I try, man. I try.
And then Ashley, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you for the next couple of weeks talking about that. Next week, we're going to be talking about Hurricane Harvey, before, during, and after Hurricane Harvey. We touched on that tonight, but next week we're going to go in depth as we have Tom Johnstone and Jeff Evans, both meteorologists in charge at the Weather Service office in Corpus Christi, as well as Houston, Texas. So that'll be next week. And then the week after that, we have Ashley for the whole hour. She's going to be talking to us about her job, what she does there in Texas, and also some of her studies with tornadoes. So looking forward to having Ashley back with us on the 13th. And then as we round out the year, December 20th, we have our annual visit with Dr. Marshall Shepard of the Weather Channel, the Weather Geeks, and University of Georgia. And so we're going to be kind of recapping the entire 2017 weather season with Marshall. And then we normally take the last week off of the month. So we won't be around on the 27th, but we've already got episodes lined up for January. I think we're fully booked through January 24th. So lots of shows coming out in January. So you guys have anything to add before we kind of log off here?
Yeah, I got one thing, Scotty, and that's just if you're joining us right now at 8:20 p.m. Eastern Time, our normal show time, we were on early for Jim Cantori. So if you're tuning in looking for Jim Cantori, we're going to hop off, and this will become available on demand, and you can play it back.
That's right. And as always, make sure you share the word about Carolina Weather Group. And Peter's laughing about something. But
James, how much did you pay for water at Starbucks?
At Starbucks, so it was like $16.
And they probably got out of the toilet.
Yeah, glacial milk, right? Is that what they call it?
Before this show goes in the toilet, let's log off. Thanks, everyone, for watching us tonight on the Carolina Weather Group. As always, you can listen to us anytime on the Apple iTunes Store, or your Google Play Store, your favorite place to download podcasts, or you can watch us anytime on YouTube Live or on our YouTube page. So until next week, we hope you have a great weekend, and thank you for joining in, and we hope to see you next week.
Quick shout out to Cinnabon. Thanks, Cinnabon.